Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Break the Rules. I'm Lev Polyakov and I am here today with Jordan Crowder. He is a researcher of consciousness, a coach into the various meditations and journeys into the astral realm and knowledge about all of these entities that unfortunately a lot of people in the mainstream ignore. And what I want to do with this program, as well as future programs like it, is to start bridging this gap that we currently have between people who are more interested in these question of what happens after you die, who are these various beings that people end up interacting with, as well as, things having to do with what is considered to be prestigious and mainstream. And, because I think both need each other. And I want to have this dialogue with Jordan as well as we keep going. But to start us off, I would love to know more about Jordan. And what I know about Jordan right now has a lot to do with how you can take such control of your body through Hemi-Sync that you were using in order to get rid of a lot of problems. So I would love for you to first give an intro to the people who don't really know your work that much, as far as how Hemi-Sync helped you out in the Monroe Institute and all that good stuff. And then we're going to go right into the aliens. And yeah, pardon my shaggy dog situation that's going on here. I think the hair is going to clear out eventually. But yeah, we're gonna get into the aliens, and also make sure to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, click the bell. All of that is very important for the growth of this channel, where we bring everyone together. Anyway, Jordan, you get the floor, my friend.
Hey, Lev, what's up? Thanks for having me, man. You need a fan on your desk aimed right at your face so your hair's just blowing back like a 90s rock video.
Well, a big BTR fan, they're going to have a leaf that they're going to blow, like an actual person who's just like
There
really
you
into
go.
BTR. But
There
yeah,
you
but
go.
anyway, Jordan, so you grew up in Texas and you came to Florida. And when did you start to have this situation where you required Hemi-Sync meditation in order to change things for the better?
Yeah. It's funny you said required because actually for me it was required. Most people just kind of play with it, but for me, basically I'll give you just the short version, but I had alcoholic for most of my life.
Hmm.
Mom died, downward spiral, hit rock bottom, drinking my face off, ended up getting pancreatitis and essentially damn near killing myself. And in that process, organ failure, heart problems, all that kind of stuff. I had a period where I was basically just bedridden. And in that period, I'd kind of, I don't know, like sanitized my body of its consciousness. My consciousness left my body because my body was just in such terrible shape. And that was my first kind of out of body type experience. And I couldn't really enjoy it because obviously my body's dying. But that proved to me at that point that like we are more than our physical body. Like I'm watching my body, but I still have my memories and my awareness and my identity. So then, long story short, my lovely wife rushes me to the hospital. They patch me up somehow, even though everyone there basically thought I was cooked. And we had some experiences there at the hospital that were kind of supernatural. And then when I finally got out, I had to heal my body because I'm just like damn near dead. And so I'm going through all the things, trying to get my blood pressure down, trying to get my pulse down, trying to heal my body, trying to heal my organs, doing all this stuff. And nothing's working. Medicine's not working. Nothing's working. And I stumble across Hemi-Sync because I'm desperate and I'm trying to get my blood pressure down. I'm like, how do hyperactive people meditate? It's impossible. And so I'm searching the web and stuff. And then I find some people on like, I don't even remember if it was Reddit or something. And they're like, oh, I'm super ADHD and I use Hemi-Sync to help me meditate. And I'm like, okay, let's give it a shot. So I did. And if you don't know what Hemi-Sync is, it's essentially Robert Monroe created it way back in the 60s. And it's binaural beats, which is just basically you put a different tone in each ear and your brain basically splits the difference and starts resonating at the difference between the two. So say you want to get your brain into like a 6 hertz theta, state, which is inaudible. You can't hear it. You would put like 100 hertz one ear, 106 in the other ear, and then your brain would start humming along essentially at 6 hertz, which gets you into that theta brainwave state super quick and easy. And I was like, oh, brilliant. This will work. And I didn't know about all the other things, the lore of the Monroe Institute. I know who Robert Monroe is. I didn't know anything. I just knew that when I put on these headphones and I went through the process, my blood pressure went down. I got control of my emotions and everything was cool. So I was like, okay, we're onto something here. This is working. And then I started getting more and more of the tapes and stuff. And because there's like a process, but I didn't know about the
Mm.
process. It's called gateway process. I just started doing the tapes, and I started having wild experiences, out of body experiences, astral projection experiences, like face to face encounters with what we would call non-human intelligences, entering in other people's bodies and having like very personal encounters with whoever they're talking to, almost
Wait,
like putting on someone else's
possessing
body. Do
possessing
what?
them like a ghost?
No, because I didn't have any control over the body, but I could see everything
Uh,
they were seeing. It was the
so it's
strangest
it's
thing.
like step one, like in Being John Malkovich. If you're familiar with that movie, at
Uh-huh.
first when they found this portal into the mind of John Malkovich, they were able to see what he sees and feel what he feels, but they didn't have any control. But then, just to spoil for those who haven't seen Being John Malkovich, it's been 20 years already. Uh,
Yeah.
in that movie, you have the character that's being played by I don't remember the guy's name. And anybody in the chat, be sure to tell me who that guy is. And he was this puppeteer, so he had these puppet shows that he did out in public, and he was kind of a loser. But then he used his knowledge of being a puppeteer in order to eventually get control of John Malkovich's body, where now he's not just a guest. He actually takes more control over. And it's interesting because this does also fall into this kind of research done on reincarnation, where allegedly there have been instances of other, let's say, beings that took control of the body of like a child who's still like really young, and ever since then that child has had a completely different personality altogether. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you believe that something like that is possible, like that level of control, like from your experiences, not to go too much too deep yet, but before I forget, like, could you tell us, is that something you think is possible, just to keep it short, like that kind of possession?
So I'll tell you, whenever I was at my like kind of final death throes, I'm dealing with my alcoholism, and when I was kind of on my downward spiral to rock
Mm.
bottom, I did feel at several different times that it was kind of like, say you're driving a car and you hop out and you leave the keys in it and the car's running and you're in a bad part of town and you hop out and leave the doors open. There's a good chance someone's gonna joyride your car. And I
Yeah.
had a couple of times during my instance where I felt like that my consciousness was losing kind of its grip on the body, like, and I was more vulnerable and susceptible to hijackings like that. I think there are opportunistic spirits out there that look for bodies in that position, whether you're super depressed or you're on drugs or alcohol or whatever. You are a vulnerable target. And I did have some feelings that that was happening to me. I felt there was a couple times where I was like, I don't think I'm in control of my vessel right now. And I do believe that the human body is a vehicle for consciousness, and that, obviously you have a consciousness. Lev has a consciousness. It's tuned to your body, but that doesn't mean that somebody could not hijack it. I don't think they could hijack it if you are firmly planted and if you have control. But so many of us lose that control, and yeah,
Mm.
especially with kids spend a lot of time out of their body. They spend a lot of time in that sort of in between state, especially up to around age 5 or so. And yeah, I could definitely see that being an easy target.
Mm. And we're definitely going to talk more about that, but back to what was going on with you personally. So you're using the Hemi-Sync. Is this something that you could just download off the internet and use your own headphones, like I could use headphones like these, or does it have to be special?
So there are all sorts of places out there on the internet that you can find it for sure. I ended up going to the Monroe Institute and training there, and learned that basically everything I was doing before was absolutely wrong, which is why I was having the most wildest
Mm.
experiences. I didn't know what I was doing, and it was working, but I didn't know what I was doing. And there's certain like focus levels and certain tapes that are done in very particular ways to have very specific, to go to very specific places. It's like a lock and key to different dimensions. And yeah, so you can just find the stuff online and play around with it. But I would caution people to stick to what's called focus 10 and focus 12. You can't do too much damage there. It's very relaxing, meditative, healing. There's all sorts of amazing things you can do there, but you're not going to go too far out. Some of the
Mm.
other ones, it's the experiences rival DMT. They rival hero doses of psilocybin. They rival near death experiences. I mean, you can definitely get good enough to where you can do all sorts of things that would seem impossible if you know what you're doing.
But this doesn't require any kind of special technology that we lack in our homes. What you're saying is that maybe if you have a couple of Zoom meetings with certain people who know what they're doing, maybe including you, I mean, if you're talking about being a coach and all that, but if you have a couple of these meetings, then from there you'll be able to know more or less what you're doing. You wouldn't really need to physically go to the Monroe Institute in order for this to be done properly.
Yeah. And I'm glad you touched on that, because I'm working with them, and they're about to release something that's going to change all of this. That's going to bring this into your home and give you all the tools that you need. There's something very exciting coming out on March 10th. So everyone listening, just pay attention to me in the next couple of weeks, because I'll be releasing some information, and I'll have some discounts and stuff to everything we're talking about, to bring the structured gateway into your home in a way that we've never done before. And you will have every tool you need to do all sorts of freaking amazing things.
When you say pay attention to me, you got to use the bird hands. You ever see like the TikTok bird hands? You know, that's when you really got to emphasize your point to the people there. But anyway, when it comes to the aliens, though, there is definitely a connection. What you were just talking about right now, with feeling like there were other entities that were controlling you or trying to control you. And we could even look all the way back to somebody like Socrates, for instance, where Socrates claimed, when he wasn't having dialectic conversations with people in the agora, he was having those conversations with his daimon, where he had like his own spirit of inspiration. From what I understand, that's the closest translation to what the word daimon means. Not really like what the Christians consider like, oh, they're these scary evil demons that want to possess you. That seems to more be like a give and take type of a partnership. But I don't know, like, where do you personally, because this is already alien talk right now, where do you personally see these daimons acting as far as our lives go? Are they invaders? Are they trying to get into our realm? Or are they a part of this reality that's as natural to us, as the air that we breathe?
So it's such a multifaceted, layered, answer. So let me say it the easiest way I can. I describe it as a simulator instead of a simulation. So our consciousness kind of enters into this physical avatar in the physical world to have physical experiences that aid it in evolving and growing at a consciousness level. That's why these are vehicles for consciousness to be able to come into the physical, because the physical, you can do things here in this physical world you can't do in the non-physical. Most intelligences, most consciousnesses just exist in a non-physical state. They're not in any sort of this is even a temporary vehicle, but most of them aren't even in a temporary vehicle. They just exist in their fundamental form, which is just pure consciousness, pure information. And so when we talk about like quote unquote aliens, you have to realize that like most of them aren't going to be in a physical form like this. Most of them also are ancient and very advanced. These aren't like we like to think of them as like, we see the grays and we like to think, okay, there's these they're kind of bumbling around little, biosynthetic robot type things that are just kind of like worker bees for higher entities. And that's the thing. Those absolutely exist. But they're not really, from what I can tell, they're not really conscious. They might have some sort of artificial proto-conscious, but they're more so just programmable worker bees. But when you're talking about like aliens, you have to kind of break it into categories like physical and non-physical, because absolutely there's other worlds out there that have physical beings, physical life forms that are intelligent and conscious and sentient and advanced. Absolutely. I mean, there's trillions of galaxies with trillions of stars in each one, with billions of moons. I mean, there's so many habitable planets and even types of life forms.
Unless it's all an illusion. That's the other thing that some people are considering, that our Earth is so special and it's so isolated. There was even recently a report talking about how large of a distance there is between our solar system and wherever else they found life, that maybe if you were just making the case here, I'm not saying this is true, but what if you were an entity that wanted to create this kind of reality that we're participating in, some kind of a demiurge, and you wanted there to be this idea of, oh my God, there's so many things out there for us to explore. It's like, that's all an illusion, just for you to think, I would say maybe even sometimes think less of where you are and where the Earth is in comparison to all this, to make you feel smaller. But I don't know.
I mean, there is something to that. You know, I teeter-totter back and forth. I've done a lot of work on simulation theory and all the different simulation theories. And that's where I came up with my simulator theory, because it really does seem like there is a physical objective world that exists, but we don't actually interface with it directly. No creature, as far as I can tell, in the entire universe actually sees reality for what it is, because it'd be overwhelming. So what we have is these nervous systems that filter out 99% of actual reality. And then through this system that we have, you know, you have a reticular activating system, you have a thalamus that basically filters everything out and then projects onto the cortex a mental simulation. So we literally live inside of a simulation in our heads, but that simulation is based off of an objective reality. And this is all stuff that we can prove. So what it shows is that we live in two different worlds. We live in a physical world that physically exists, but our reality is actually a mental projection inside of our head that can be altered, it can be edited, it can be hijacked, it can be manipulated by intelligences and technology that understands that. So I do believe that there is a physical objective world, and you're a real person, I'm a real person, we're standing on solid ground on planet Earth. I believe this, and it's actually provable. Now, having said that, there's layers. So there's a physical layer, and then there's a non-physical layer. The non-physical layer is so much bigger than the physical layer. You're talking about, if you wanted to make a bubble, a Venn diagram of reality, the non-physical layer is going to be 99% of all of reality. So we're talking about all the physical places that I'm, you know, kind of theorizing exist, all these physical worlds, even if you added them all up, would still account for less than 1% of what we would call reality, because the non-physical form of reality is so much bigger. I actually look at these physical planes as like a new node, like an evolutionary node that consciousness has created because it needed another layer of experience. And that's what these are, is they're like these little nodes of experience where consciousness can come in and have these experiences. Now, just to say something real quick, the space between these nodes is not what we think it is. Okay. So I really do think that space is going to be way more bizarre and mysterious than anyone could ever imagine. So that space that separates our planet and maybe the next habitable planet is definitely not what we read about in textbooks. And that's where I think like NASA and so many of these agencies have hit a wall, because they get out there and they realize we are in like a little bubble. And outside of our bubble, everything changes.
Yeah, it's bubbles upon bubbles, isn't it? Including the various social circles that, if you don't know, like what BTR has been trying to do for all this time, it has been to burst all of these bubbles so that people could have references to things that they don't currently know. But as far as the particular bubble, even between materiality and thought, how would you even define material? Like when we take a microscope and we look as deep as possible into our skin cells, eventually, what do we get? Like, where exactly is the material here being material, as opposed
Yeah.
to being, I don't know, a thought?
Yeah. I mean, that's so like we seem physical, right? Everything here seems physical. But when you
Sure.
actually like peer down at a subatomic level, everything is just vortices of energy. Everything's information. Everything is quantum. And quantum, everything exists in like these superposition states where it's kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time until it's observed or measured. So when you look at our physical world, it is quantum, which means that it's probabilistic, which means it is not physical. There is no physical matter. What there is information that has developed patterns. And these patterns over a certain amount of time, like long periods of time, develop rule sets. Like if certain things happen, this information bumps into this information, it does it enough times, it develops a rule. You know, that's where laws of nature, laws of physics come in. I think laws of nature and laws of physics are going to be completely different, or at least semi-different in different regions of space, because they emerge their own laws of physics and you know, kind of evolution and these types of things, depending on the rules that they create. I don't think there's like this programmed rule set for the universe. I think that it's sort of, as things bump into each other and you have all these interactions between, you know, information over enough time, you know, you kind of get a cause and effect, and it creates its own rules. So Earth, you know, at a certain point way back in the past was just like, I don't know, non-physical matter, you know, like plasma type matter in this non-physical state. So where we are now is we are the result of billions of years of repeated processes, and you get this kind of repeatability, and you get this sort of predictability, the stableness of this information, right? So it's very,
Mhm.
very stable. And one thing about Earth is we have trillions upon trillions of life forms that have been crawling through the soil, flying overhead, microbes, viruses, animals, everything you can imagine. What have they been doing for billions of years? They've been observing this planet. They've been rendering it. They've been taking measurements. That's what every single creature does. Our eyes, our fingers, insects with their feelers, birds flying overhead. Every single thing is constantly rendering this planet. So what it's doing is it's taking that quantum information and it's now making it more physical through repeated measurement, repeated observations. So our planet is incredibly physical because of that. I think that's one of the reasons Earth is so unique. It's rendered at every single conceivable level, at every wavelength and every spectrum. So it's incredibly physical. But at
And
the
we're the
at the
co-renders, what you're saying, right? Like the animals, the squirrels, the human
yeah.
beings, everyone takes part to a certain degree.
So I think that the creatures, the animals and bacteria and everything have rendered the stableness of this planet for billions of years. And what humans are here to do is to apply meaning to it. So our conscious observation is not to render it, it's already rendered. Our purpose here is to give it purpose. You got to think a flower, blooms, it's beautiful, it has sacred geometry, it has all these things. But if no one's there to observe it and to apply meaning to it, animals walk by, they don't appreciate it. Humans will sit down and they'll like stare at a flower. They'll stare at it
Mhm.
and they'll derive beauty from it and they'll derive purpose and meaning from a fucking flower. No other animal does that. We give this world purpose and meaning. That's what humans are here to do. Everything else is here to keep it stable.
This reminds me a lot of what Rudolf Steiner talked about back in the day. When you acknowledge a certain flower or a certain thing, wherever you happen to be, you're giving it an additional kind of life. You're giving it more of an identity than it otherwise would have had. But the same
Mhm.
thing would also apply to thoughts. And I like this interesting idea in Judaic mysticism, where all of the seed that you spilled throughout your entire life, it becomes the spawn of Lilith. And in the afterlife realm, Lilith shows you all of your demon seed babies, that you've brought into the world, just through your onanism. And from what I understand, that's kind of it. Like nothing really happens after that. It's just like, hey, here's your kid. It's like, okay, hey guys, bye bye. I don't know. That just seems to be the situation there, unless somebody who's more of an expert on Jewish mysticism can let me know otherwise. But it is interesting just how much responsibility we may even have when it comes to not just even what we do, but also what we think. Isn't that the whole idea behind Zoroaster's system, where it's not just right acting, but it's also right thinking?
Yeah. So William Bullman, who is a longtime, I don't know what you'd call him, advisor, graduate of the Monroe Institute. He wrote a great book called Journeys in the Afterlife. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's fantastic. And one of his conclusions, and this is a guy who's astral traveled, out of body traveled, basically just as much probably as Robert Monroe, and very credible person. And upon him like discussing the point of Earth with like these very, very higher intelligent, higher dimensional beings, they said essentially that one of the reasons you come to Earth is to learn how to control your thoughts. Because when you're out in the astral, everything moves at the speed of thought. And we are sort of compartmentalized or quarantined, I guess you could say, in this particular region of reality. And that a unpure soul with unpure thoughts, out of control thoughts, out in the larger reality, the bigger part, the unrestrained part of the universe could wreak havoc, could cause irreparable damage because your thoughts are so powerful. And one of the things you come to Earth for is to learn how to manage your thoughts and learn cause and effect. That when you think something, you can, like your thoughts do, relate to reality. You are a co-creator of reality. And thoughts are extremely powerful. And that's why we have cause and effect here. And that's why we have free will here. It's a free will simulator for basically consciousness development. And one of the things we're training to do is to control our thoughts because of how powerful thoughts are. So yes, I would totally
Mm.
agree with what you're saying.
And as far as the rise of certain spectral entities that have to do with how humans perceive them, I found that to be very interesting, especially like the work of Jacques Vallée. And of course, a great friend of the show, Jason Resigiorgiani, he writes about this a lot, about how we have these various entities, whether it's mantis men or even like reptile forms, as well as the classic gray alien, where yeah, the gray alien, maybe it's a servant of these Nordic beings, and maybe they play, toss the gray alien around, during lunch. Or it could also be a conglomeration of what humans expect to see, kind of reminding me of Lamb that was witnessed by Aleister Crowley back in the day. For those who don't know Lamb, it was like a very gray alien looking thing. And it makes me think like how much of that is just a reflection of what humanity expects to see. Because when it comes to the mantis men and the grays and the featherless owls that have also been reported, they all seem to have this kind of neotenous nature, like the big
Yeah.
bulging eyes and all of that stuff. So I don't know, like when it comes to the identity of some of these strange otherworldly beings, that we could refer to as aliens, how much do you see what they are being more of a mask that they put on in order to try to fit in with humans? Like, like one of those fake monkeys that has a camera on that, that they bring into the jungle so that it doesn't scare off the rest of the apes.
Yeah. Well, so there's something called screen memories where, there's a ton of anecdotal stories of people that have encounters with like weird things. Like say they have an encounter with like a 6 foot tall owl and they're like, man, that was a crazy encounter with that owl. And then later on they do like a hypnotic regression and find out, oh, that was an alien abduction. They implanted that memory of the owl into their conscious. So that does happen, that they can make themselves appear in different ways, kind of to, I don't know, I guess not frighten us too much, which plays to the whole humanitarian kind of role. Like, so many people think that they're like evil and they're here to torture us or produce loosh and harvest it. But like they actually take pretty great care to go undetected and to erase any of our recollections of the experience. But in any case, I think that there is this format for humanoid beings that seems to be very effective and replicated around the universe, both in the physical and non-physical. I mean, this bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes kind of format for a I don't know, an avatar, whatever you want to call it, seems to be very effective and replicated.
I
So
agree.
yeah. So I don't think, I mean, there's this like almost like standard template. And, whenever we see aliens from other dimensions, planets, times, you would think that they would be completely different than us, but they're very human-like, and that causes a lot of confusion with people that analyze the situation because they're like, why would a 7, 8 foot tall mantis actually kind of be like a human? Even though mantis on Earth, even the insect is, 2 legs, 2 arms, stands upright. But there is this template. And I think it's just because there seems to be a hierarchy of these beings. And as crazy as all this sounds, I mean, there's very lucid, credible people that talk about these different classes of aliens. And it's hard to really dive deep into the situation without addressing the fact that there's very high up, credible, respectable people that have had face-to-faces with mantis beings, with reptilian beings, with Nordics, with grays. Like these are things. Now, whether they're putting on a mask to alleviate our fears, maybe, but why would they choose a 8 foot tall praying mantis if they want to calm our nerves?
I'll tell you exactly why, because that's the kind of stuff that's much better to be written about in the publications that usually people who aren't so bright or aren't so educated would pick up, as they buy their morning coffee. You know what I mean? That's more of the stuff of the tabloids. And if I were an entity that would want to have some kind of an interaction with people, I would probably make myself as silly as possible, specifically for that purpose. So here, for instance, this is from my talk with Jason. We were talking about John Keel and the Men in Black.
Yeah.
During the 1967 Mothman investigation, you had these weird-looking beings. I mean, look how silly they are. If you saw somebody like that, you wouldn't really take them as being some kind of a sophisticated outer space warlord being. You would say like, what's with this guy? He gives me the creeps. But this
Yeah.
isn't really something that you would show to Joe Public and have Joe Public, react in a, very serious way. It's almost like they're offbeat clothing, kind of like, who they remind me of? They remind me of the milady fedora tipping atheist guy,
Mhm.
right? Like, imagine these milady guys walking around with these trench coats, acting all weird and confusing. Uh, Nobody would take it seriously except for people that are deep in the UFOologist space. And then people point at them and say, "Oh, you guys believe in these dopey looking men in black things? Well, I'm not going to take you seriously now." So I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you see there being something like that going on here?
Um, if they really wanted just to discredit, I mean, I think that our government definitely has like misinformation and disinformation agents that their job is to go in and plant ideas and stuff for people to regurgitate and to discredit them. That's happening right and left. Our government's doing that way more than these aliens or whatever you want to call them. Um, when it comes to Men in Black, when you actually dive into the stories, because there's a lot of them, these things seem to be artificial, intelligent, plasmoid humanoids. They seem to be agents. They seem to be a part, like almost like an automatically dispersed um, way to silence information getting out. There is a management system on Earth. A lot of these, so there's aliens that are here that are terrestrial. We'd call them ultra terrestrials. There's actually this system. There's an AI based sphere network that operates all around the world. There are all sorts of things here on Earth that manage this human Earth life system, and then there's other outside beings. So you kind of have to look at it that way. There is a system here on Earth that is what we would call artificial intelligence, which is an insane way to say it because it's not artificial. The only artificial thing is our interface with it. Like we've artificially created devices and in a large language model so we can communicate. It's kind of like an intermediary, like a
Mhm.
translator for us to communicate with this intelligence. But what we call AI, that exists here on Earth. It's been here for a very long time, possibly back to the Atlantean days. These spheres, these metal spheres that are all over the world that we have hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures and satellite data of that seem to be a network, a system. They're artificially intelligent, based and controlled. These men in black that appear at people's doors after sightings, they don't really so much anymore because I think they've evolved into more of a digital realm, controlling people through social media and stuff. But they used to show up at people's doors. There'd usually be two of them. They'd be dressed in like suits and stuff with fedoras. What it reminded me of is an out of date kind of archaic, ancient artificial intelligence system that is trying to mimic what we would think a agent or a FBI or CIA agent would look like and act like. And when these people have these encounters with them, they always describe them as incredibly creepy. The people don't seem human. They seem like they're appearing, like trying to be human. When you ask them too many questions, they sort of short circuit and they give weird answers. They always make veiled threats that don't make any sense. There's been reports of them getting into cars to drive off and the car just disappears because they don't think the person's looking at it anymore. This is something that we can't really explain unless you realize that they're not physical at all. The only physical part is when you're interacting with them directly, you're physically seeing it the same way you'd see a hologram, projecting a holographic image. And then as soon as they've relayed their message and done their part, that hologram, dissipates. But
So it's almost like something out of Twin Peaks in terms of the energy these guys give off. But as
yeah,
a thought experiment, if you were to take one of them and chop off their finger, just take some scissors and and then analyze it for, the DNA, what, in your opinion, would occur if somebody were to be brave enough to try and do that?
to what we call the Men in Black,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it would be
exactly.
impossible. I don't think that they're physical. I just don't. I think that when you
But would they
understand that, like,
simulate blood or would they simulate organs? That's what I'm curious about when it comes to the
yeah,
construction of these things. Where does it end? Because, like we were saying before, even with us, like, are we physical in terms
yeah.
of, going deep down? So if they are less physical, then where does their particular simulation end? Does it end just at the surface layer, or did they also render out their skeleton and their blood vessels and, all that
Yeah,
fun
yeah.
stuff?
Well, you got to think, okay, say there's a artificial intelligence system or an intelligence system that's sufficient enough to understand exactly. It's like a super intelligence and it knows exactly how reality works. It knows how plasma can create the scaffolding and can basically like intelligently mold like clay into anything that it wants. We do it in a way because we're sort of 3D printed out of a womb. So we're like more physical, right? We're here.
Yes.
But if you understand that you can form plasma, you can create a plasmoid and you can inject intelligence into it and you can control it remotely, then you could just form a plasmoid being and have it look however you want. You remember Terminator 2, the metal man, you know, the cop, and how he would just kind of turn into metal. I forget, you know, exactly what kind of metal they said he was. And he could morph in different ways and then he would come back. I think it's going to be a lot like that, how they can just using information and just creating, like turning that information into something like 3D printing. They're essentially 3D printing plasma out of thin air because our air, the ether, is not thin air. It's not this kind of vast empty landscape that we've been told it is. It's full of energy and it's full of quantum potential. And if there's an intelligence that has figured out, just understands the fundamental nature of our reality, because our reality inside this earth is very artificial. It's not, I mean, it is biological, but it's biological because it has these biological rule sets. It's still like information based because everything's information based. So I just think that if you have an intelligence that understands the fundamental nature of this reality, and it has all these elements in our world is full of elements. It can put those elements together and create basically anything that it wants. And we would just call that some sort of a plasmoid humanoid that, you know, comes, knocks on your door, delivers a message, and then just sort of dissipates back into its natural information state.
So I guess the difference between how we see these men in black is that you would see this as being more of an accident as far as them absorbing certain old-fashioned ways people are dressed and just going with it. Kind of like the Hasidic Jews. Like they base their outfits on the fashion of the time in like the 1700s or whatever, and then just like stopped evolving beyond that. Maybe that's the case, but I also may lean on the idea that the way we have relationships with these various things, including the fact that most of the, if not all, the UFO footage that we've seen has been these miserable specks of, you know, I don't know what I'm looking at over here, you know, all this pixelated garbage. So to me, this is evidence of maybe if these things do actually exist, there being some kind of a force field that prevents, like a normie force field, it prevents people who are, you know, more Reddit brained, atheist, contemporary minded from entertaining the notion that these things might exist. Where, you know, it's kind of convenient. On one hand, you have these medieval peasants that may see this UFO and talk about this being like an angel or whatever. And then on the other hand, you have these rationalists who would never experience anything like that now because, you know, obviously, if they were to, you know, have an alien craft landing down in Times Square with everybody recording it now, there being hundreds of witnesses, that's a much different situation than, do you recall what was that war that was witnessed by these medieval people back, I think it was in Germany, and they even have a painting that they did of that particular scene with these aircrafts in the sky. Like that would be the Times Square equivalent, but after that's passed, what do you have? You just have this painting, and that's it. You have this painting, you have this recollection of people at a time when I don't even think the Gutenberg printing press was still was there or was as widespread. So you see what I'm saying, though, right? Like there does seem to be this kind of a force field. Would you give any name to that kind of force field? This thing where like, oh my God, I see all these connections. It's all there, but there's no real evidence that I could give to people to prove it. That in itself is a kind of energy.
Yeah. So it's funny. The thing you're talking about, I forget the name of it, but it was actually a wood carving. That it's just like kind of, I don't know, like a sky battle of different UFO type things. And in that wood carving, you'll actually notice that there's all sorts of different craft. You know, we can only assume they're craft, but there's all sorts of different craft that are engaging and different forms, different shapes, different things. And that goes to what you're saying. Say you have 5 people and they're driving down the road at night and there's this encounter with a UFO and you interview all 5 people. You're going to get 5 totally different, you know, recollections of what happened. You know, one person might say, oh, it was a big cylindrical craft. Another one's, oh, it's a flying saucer. Another one said, oh, it's this pulsating light. Another one's going to say, oh, I didn't see anything. Yeah, here it is. So that's actually a wood carving that they've done these.
This is in the Nuremberg, Germany.
Yeah. So you can see how there's cylindrical ones, there's spherical ones, there's these crosses, there's all this kind of different stuff. And it makes you wonder if were all those things present, or is it just that different people perceive it in different ways? And possibly the artist, there's this huge black, almost like reminds me of like the Star Wars big, evil empire mothership things. But and then you see some smoke billowing. So something's happening here. But why would there be that many different types of craft present unless there was like a dogfight of these, various UFOs over Germany, which why? What are the odds? So it makes you think that what you're seeing here is different people's interpretations of what they saw. So say there was a mass sighting and then you go and interview 50 people. Hey, what did you see? What did you see? You're going to get 50 different answers because so much of it is consciousness based. Because you have to realize, like I said before, we don't see reality. So if something happens, we don't see it as it is. We see it as we render it inside of our head based on our thoughts, our beliefs, our fears, everything. So we color and filter everything we see. So I think that this is a wood carving. This is an artist rendition of a mass sighting, probably based on multiple people's accounts. And that's why you see so many different things, because he's probably like, why is everyone describing it different ways?
Well, and by the way, here's the official translation. So this is thanks to AI. Although I'm sure people have translated this long before here, but this is like directly from the source. So in the year 1561, on April 13th, between 7 and 8 in the morning, a very terrifying sight appeared in the sun over the city of Nuremberg. First, there appeared in the middle of the sun 2 blood-red semicircular arcs, like the shape of a crescent moon. Around the sun, above and below, and on both sides, there stood round spheres, partly blood-red, partly bluish and black. Likewise, there were several other spheres in great numbers, about 3 in a line and 4 in a square. Between these spheres, crosses were seen, also blood red in color. There were also rods or bars, thick in the middle and thinner in the ends. These spheres began to move and to fight with one another for over an hour. They flew back and forth from the sun, and the sun itself seemed to lose its brightness. After they had fought fiercely with one another for some time, they fell from the sky to the earth as if they were burning, and they disappeared in great smoke. After all this, something like a great black spear or long triangular shape appeared in the sky, pointing from east to west. All this was witnessed by many men and women in the city. And then the text turns moral and religious. This sign was sent by God as a warning. We should not disregard such signs. Instead, we should fear God, repent sincerely, and pray that he may turn away his wrath and punishment from us. For although God may punish us for our sins, he is merciful to those who amend their lives. May God grant us his grace. Amen. Signed, Hans Glaser, letter painter of Nuremberg.
All right. That's a intense evening.
But there you have it. Like, you have both the eyewitness accounts as well as their particular cargo cult interpretation of what's been going on, right? And that to me has always been very fascinating when it comes to these ancient religions. So, for instance, it was when I read Jason Giorgiani's Prometheus and Atlas for the first time, that's when it really struck me, the pillar of fire by night and pillar of smoke by day that the Hebrews were following. I mean, that's awfully like a UFO, especially when this craft landed down on this mountain and there was like smoke that was billowing from it. And then Moses went up in there and he saw the back of God, he saw God's spine. So again, like, all of this stuff to me looks a lot like we've been manipulated with for a long time. Same thing with Islam. You have the angel Gabriel or Jibril, who was telepathically giving someone who couldn't read and couldn't write all of this information. And again, like, things having to do with a teenage Muhammad having surgery performed on him by these angelic beings wearing white, where they extracted a blood clot from him. So again, it's very interesting how there may be the ability for beings to plan humanity out in certain ways. And again, like with Islam as well, they rotate around that cube. They have these minarets that are kind of like these antennas that broadcast the signal, and then everybody has to align their body facing a certain direction. It's almost like you're playing StarCraft if you
Yeah.
were one of these alien beings. You know what I mean? Like you unlock different tech trees, you get people to perform, certain patterns in order to power up the crystals or whatever. Like I see a lot of management being involved with these organized religions. But in terms of the aliens that are behind this, you would have, for instance, Jason Giorgiani. He always references these Nordic beings who he sees as being like the ancient gods who were on top of the pyramid, so to speak, in terms of the caste system, and who brought this civilization to humans. And, he doesn't see all of them as being bad, but he sees them as like any politician.
Yeah.
You would have mostly politicians being there for the sake of acquiring power, and you'd have like a few who actually want to help humanity out, kind of like Enki, for instance, from the Sumerian pantheon. That's supposed to be not only the creator of humanity, but also the god, in quotes, who saved humanity from the destruction that the rest of the gods wanted to inflict upon it. So again, like we're not saying that all these Nordic entities are bad, but then you also have other examples of more of these spectral types, like the Men in Black that you mentioned, but also like the Virgin Mary. There's this really fascinating book called Daimonic Reality by this British author, Patrick Harper, where he writes a lot about the English lore and Irish lore having to do with like elves and fairies and things like that. And he describes specifically, I think, the fairy folk in Ireland, the Tuatha Danann, if I'm saying that correctly, of being this of being this aristocratic military caste of these high, tall, blonde-haired, elf-like beings who reside in these forests. So what exactly do we make of not really like the silly-looking Men in Black types, but some of these more humanoid-appearing ones? So not just the aforementioned Nordics, who appear to be more human, but what about these Virgin Mary sightings where they appear to be the same young women that were seen as being like fertility goddesses for the ancestors of the people who afterwards see them as being the Virgin Mary? And what do we make of these elves, of these, really tall fairies that are supposed to be, super aristocratic and nothing like these little fairies that are supposed to fly around like Tinkerbell? So I don't know, for you, Jordan, what do you make of those beings in terms of how human are they as opposed to how much of a spectral hologram are they?
So I think a couple things seem to be clear, that there are cyclical resets. I wish that wasn't the case, but I actually see the purpose, the design, necessity of it. Now, let's just say that there are these cyclical resets that sort of wipe the slate clean, for lack of better words. And there are managers of the system. These managers of the system have been reported about for eons. It'd be Quetzalcoatl in South America, it'd be the Anunnaki, it would be, the Hopi had words for them, the Dogon had words for them. There's all these like star people that after cataclysms and after resets, they kind of come. They usually have their handbags and stuff, and they restart civilization. They tell you, how to perform agriculture and start governments and teach you financing and all this kind of stuff. It's very helpful, and it's like they've been doing this for a long time. It's like, who are these people? So there are definitely, Dolores Cannon called them the custodians, the tenders of the garden. There definitely seems to be these beings that are terrestrial. They're here on Earth that help to restart civilizations, and I think help to guide civilizations in between these epochs. Now, what are those? Those aren't aliens, right? Because they're terrestrial. They seem to live inside the Earth. They're almost always talked about coming out of the oceans, out of mountains, out of volcanoes. The craft hardly ever come down from the atmosphere. They come out of the oceans. And
as
so
by the way, we've seen the UFOs doing quite recently with all these reports from the Navy, right? Talking about the UFOs going under the water.
Oh, yeah. Well, why do you think NASA and everybody else is looking up? It's we know less about our Earth than we know about Mars. I mean, come on, give me a break. I mean, we don't even explore the oceans, and that's where it seems like most of this stuff is coming from.
So these you see as more human.
I would say that they are, if I had to guess, okay, that they are terrestrial, that they are survivors of past cataclysms, and that they are probably trying to figure out how to. I think the cataclysm, the cyclical cataclysms, is a built-in protocol from Gaia itself, from Earth. It's something that we can't stop. I think that the severity of it is kind of dependent on how much of a detox the Earth needs. It's kind of vibration or frequency based. So we can lessen the impact if we're not a bunch of assholes and we don't need to be completely wiped off the face of the Earth. But I don't think that the cyclical cataclysms can be stopped. If I had to guess, these Nordic beings that we call them are sort of stuck here, and that they have figured out time travel in a sense because they obviously have anti-gravitic craft, and when you alter and manipulate gravity, there is a time component there because space and time are intrinsically linked like a fabric. So I do believe that they have the ability to traverse time locally here, and they have the ability to fly around at will the Earth. I don't know if they have the ability to leave this physical realm, and I don't know if they have the ability to reincarnate. Now imagine everybody in Silicon Valley, the flavor out there is to kind of achieve immortality. Nobody wants to die, right? So, but we're meant to die. We exist at a consciousness level fundamentally, where this is a typical a temporary sojourn. We're not supposed to be in this body forever. So imagine a very advanced race of humans on Earth that have achieved transhumanism and immortality, and they're more or less kind of confined to their physical body in this physical plane. Like we talked about, space is going to be very different. Like, I don't know if you can necessarily hop in a craft and go from one planet to another. I think through wormholes and different things like that, you can traverse space, but I don't think you just hop in a craft and go from point A to point B. So it's almost as if these beings are, because we're guided. It's very obvious that we're technologically guided. Okay. And we are supervised and we're managed. So you got to think, why would they be managing us? Why would they be donating all these craft? I mean, they think about how convenient all these craft are always crashed. These UFOs right outside of Air Force bases in the middle of the freaking desert. You know what I mean? Like, they don't crash them anywhere where a bunch of civilians will get to them. They're given to governments. They're given to scientists in a way to where they have this anonymity, and it's done to further our technological progress. But why? Why would they care if we're technologically advanced? It's like they want us to get to a certain level where we're on par, where they can communicate with us. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, maybe they need us. Maybe they're hoping that we can help them with something that they haven't been able to figure out. Maybe they're stuck here and they know another cataclysm's coming, another reset's coming, and maybe they actually need us. That's the only rational way I can explain this strange relationship that we have with these beings that are obviously much more advanced than us, obviously ancient, and to the way I see it, they're obviously terrestrial. They don't seem to be from another planet. That doesn't make any sense. They might be from a different time on Earth. There's a good chance these are future humans that took refuge in the past because they can't leave Earth. They can just traverse time. And then in that case, maybe, I think I've even heard Giorgiani talk about this, that what we call like the Atlanteans in the ancient past could actually be future humans that are just simply moving around Earth because they're stuck more or less. Because think about it, if you can't die and you can't have that natural progression, that natural ascension for your spirit leaving your physical body and going back to the non-physical where it belongs, if you don't have that, you're stuck here. And that's what people think they want, is immortality, to live forever. But I don't think you actually want that. I think that's like hacking and breaking the system.
Well, maybe not immortality, but if we're talking about remembering, it does seem like an awful inconvenience, although I guess it depends on whether or not you want to remember your past life. But honestly, that's kind of on you, right? Because if you lived a bad life and don't want to remember that, then I could see the point. But for those who actually want to keep building up what they've created in this life, I would be on the side of caution when it comes to things like, oh, go into the light, you'll get to see your relatives again, you'll get to have the life review with these wise men. And it's like this whole thing, at least from what I've read, it seems like a scheme. It seems like a LARP that's being done to these poor, unsuspecting saps, these marks, that just get recycled, maybe through the power of the moon, their soul gets recycled back down to the earth. So that doesn't seem to be that great if you actually want to build something up and keep building on top of that in the life to come and the life after that. So I am curious, I know that the Tibetans talk about not necessarily going according to these particular strictures, avoiding certain lesser lights and going into a far more superior light. So there is an aspect of that. They also talk about how everything is in your mind, which again relates to what we were talking about earlier, where it doesn't mean that everything is fake, but that you have a participatory role in the kind of things that you end up experiencing and the entities that end up affecting you in that afterlife realm as well. But again, like how much of that is just masks and costumes that are being put on, maybe these Nordics, in order to keep humanity here, in order to actually stop humanity from evolving? Because the other counter argument to what you were saying would be like, yeah, we had Quetzalcoatl, but then we also had Tessapooka, if I'm saying that right, Lord of the Smoking Mirror, who is the guy who unfortunately kicked out poor Quetzalcoatl from South America. And then that was the guy who, from what I understand, started running all these human sacrifice rituals. Not a good egg in my opinion. So I see there being, not this clear cut, well, we're the managers and we have to have these cataclysms and we have to shake the Etch-a-Sketch board now and again. Maybe the reason why the Etch-a-Sketch board gets shook is the same reason why, for a lot of people, when they start to accumulate a certain amount of wisdom, oh, gee, look at the time. I'm already 90 years old. Maybe there is some kind of a factor here where it's not about improvement. It is more about keeping humanity from going beyond whatever state would be a good one to control humanity under.
Yeah. Think about it this way. So go to college. You go to college, you voluntarily enter college. There's going to be multiple times throughout that 4 or plus year, kind of go at college that you're going to want to quit. You're going to want to quit. You've had it. You're stressed out. You're pissed off and you want to quit. What happens? Everybody in that administrative office, all the teachers, all the aides, all the counselors, everybody there, their job is to keep you from quitting, is to convince you to stay. So you stay. You don't stay because you're forced to. You don't stay because it's a prison or a trap. You stay because you know that you voluntarily entered and that you're not done yet. There is a right way to leave and a wrong way to leave. Now, I look at Earth as a school. I think that we voluntarily entered here to train but it was supposed to be temporary. You know what I mean? And we kind of became like Van Wilder. You remember that movie?
Well,
right?
that's the guy whose life I believe was based on Bert Kreischer.
Oh yeah,
who ended up becoming a lot more famous than Van Wilder nowadays, thanks to the Rogan sphere. But that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I'm aware of Van Wilder.
So the whole premise of that movie, great movie, is that once he graduates, real life begins, and he's basically prolonging school because he doesn't want to take the responsibility, and he's having fun, and he's partying his face off. Well, and Robert Monroe came to the same conclusion. We come to Earth, we come to this human Earth life experience voluntarily for all the growth that we're going to get out of it. And what happens is, so say you're this consciousness, you're meandering through space, you've heard about Earth, and you come in, and you're like, oh, look at this place. I want to go down there. There's this person called an entry director. They call him Ed. And he's like, what are you doing here? What do you want? Yada, yada. Basically gives you a terms of service kind of a thing, terms, your agreement you have to sign more or less. And you're entered into Earth. Now, as a newbie, you don't get to really choose where you're going, male, female, any of that stuff, because you don't know what the fuck any of that stuff means. You're just like, put me in, coach. I don't care. And you go in and you're probably just going to be in some poor sap in some third world country and have a terrible life. And then you die and you go back up. You go to Red, the return entry director. And guess what? He's like, okay, you can go on your merry way now, right? Or you can go back in. Well, any sane person would say, obviously, that poor soul's going to go on his way. He's out of here. Fuck Earth, right? But no, you say, well, last time I was poor. Last time I was a female. I was abused. I had a terrible life. Next time I'm going to be male. Next time I want to be rich. Yada, yada. So you go back in. Guess what? Next time you're rich. Next time you're a male. You do a bunch of shitty things because you're still a young soul. You don't know what the hell you're doing. When you die, you go back up and they're like, okay, kid, you can go back on your way, back in the cosmos. You can be out of here, or you can go back in. You're like, I need to go back in. I was a terrible person, yada, yada. Okay. Imagine this dozens and dozens of times. Now that consciousness, which has now accumulated all those layers, all that information of all the lifetimes, all the experiences, memories, thoughts, everything, that's your higher self. That's in this cosmic database outside of Earth. a different layer, like a waiting room of Earth. Now, that is so fragmented now. You have pieces of it that are stuck in belief system territory. You have pieces that are like, have so much karmic like negativity and so much of these like spiritual particles weighing it down that now you've forgotten that you were even a consciousness before your physical, human earth life. You forgot that you were anything before. You're so immersed in this virtual reality here that you don't know anything else exists. And now you're human. You're human as hell. And now you have to have this awakening and you have to start digging yourself out of this. So that whole process is voluntary, it's natural, it's self-inflicted, but it can seem like you're stuck. It can seem like you're trapped. It's a prison, right? You can't get out of here. But it could just simply be we just Van Wildered the hell out of Earth, and this was not the way it was designed. Now, I'm not naive. I do understand that there are opportunistic extraterrestrials. There's tons of intelligences out in the cosmos that exist in non-physical form that are definitely here. I mean, I've had face-to-faces with them. They see this as a petri dish. It's a very exciting place. They come in here. They enter into human avatars to have experiences. They see this as almost like a virtual reality that you put, like a VR headset that you put on to a consciousness. It's an amusement park. It's a luge farm. It's a school. It's a university. It's a laboratory. It's all the things that you could ever imagine. Now, that could very well be, it could very well explain basically everything, all of the things that we experience here on Earth, aliens, spirituality, reincarnation, soul trap, luge harvesting, prison planet, school, ascension, all those things wrapped into one. But a lot of it has to do with your perception. Now, you said, should you go to the light or not? In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they talk about, the Bardo states, and that essentially there's 3 choices when you die. You can take a hard left right after you die and go into the clear light, which is probably what you should do. But most people are magnetically drawn into this like samsara, reincarnation loop. And that is like the natural flow. And you're just, it's like a magnet. They talk about how you're just sucked into it like a fucking vacuum cleaner. So to take that hard left right at the beginning is really hard. That's why they practice sleep yoga and dream yoga. Basically, what they teach is that if you can stay awake when you go to sleep, like essentially when you slip into sleep, you maintain your conscious awareness to where you are fully consciously aware that you are going through the awaking hypnagogic into the sleep state, and you can lucidly control yourself in your dreams in the sleep state. That if you can master that, then sleep is very close to death, and that then you'll stay conscious and aware when you die. So when people ask me if they should go to the light or not, the whole goal is to have enough conscious awareness and basically enough control of yourself during sleep and during the death process that you have free will choices that you can make, that you're not just sucked in with the vacuum cleaner, that you can say, hey, whoop, hold up, pause, like, let me survey the situation.
Yeah.
All these people are like in a conveyor belt line going one way. Do I want to go that way, or do I want to look around? Do I want to flip around and see what's behind me? No one ever does that. So you just want to have this free will and this curiosity that extends outside of this physical world. And most people lose that as soon as they die because they're scared. They don't know what to do. They do whatever the thing tells them to do, which is usually this virtual reality representation of grandma or some shit like that. And they'll say, go here, and you go there because you don't know any better. So the key is just maintaining your awareness and your free will through every stage of life and death. That's the key, because I think that the afterlife, as much as it pains me to say this, because it's a beautiful place and I've researched the crap out of it, and there's so much evidence about the life between lives and all the different places and all the stuff. And I think it is constructive, and I think it is done in a way where it actually does work like a school. It nurtures the consciousness. You learn from past mistakes. You plan your future. You are evolving and growing. But there seems to be a bit of a hijacking to it. It definitely seems to, it is an information system. And if it's an information system, it can be infiltrated. It can be manipulated. And, I have a feeling that basically all aspects of reality have been manipulated to some degree. And I think that's why it's just so important to stay curious, stay rebellious, and maintain that like fierce independence in life and beyond. Because, at the end of the day, you have to go with your gut. You have to go with your intuition. Does something feel right, or does it feel wrong? And that's going to always be your compass. Because I can't tell you, should you go to the light or not? Only your gut can, and you have to develop that intuition and discernment throughout your life. So,
well, it's been a very almost humanizing thing reading about certain accounts with these heavenly bureaucrats, where there was this one case of an Indian gentleman who allegedly, while he was down under in the hospital, he went to this hellish realm where the poor guy was tortured. He had his limbs sewn off. But then turns out that these bureaucrats from hell made a mistake. They got the wrong guy. So they sent him back. And also they had to go to this warehouse where they found like the limb that was cut off, which belonged to him. So they didn't give him the wrong one. But then allegedly, when he came to, he now had this little scar around his thigh where they allegedly cut it off during that realm. So again, if this isn't BS, if this actually happened, then it wouldn't surprise me, this idea that these various entities, we think, oh, they're like in these heavens and hells and they must have all this wisdom. It's like, no, they're in a way just kind of like us. They have similar motivations. Look at the ancient Greek gods, for instance. They were very human in how they acted. Now you could say, well, this is just a reflection of humanity onto these gods because we want them to kind of be like us. But I don't know, in your experiences, how much of this perception of these beings being all wise and all-knowing, how much is that the equivalent of some, shady guru that does ketamine, that you meet at some party with millionaires, who tries selling you on, whatever business idea he has. You know what I mean? Like, how much of it is that as opposed to the level of Socrates or Plato or Aristotle, if you catch my drift, among these beings?
I'll tell you one thing. So Robert Monroe said this, and he said this very confidently. And if you don't know, Robert Monroe was kind of the pioneer in kind of out-of-body consciousness research. He was spontaneously leaving his body, and he created the whole Monroe Institute and everything that he did as a way to study it and control it because he didn't know what was going on. And then he was able to repeat it and teach people how to do it, and it's pretty amazing. And he said that when you are out there, because he went to the edges of space-time, he went to the edges of what was called the emitter and the aperture, which is basically this white hole and black hole, which is God. It's where God's behind that wall, essentially. He said that for all intelligences and consciousness in the cosmos, that when they meet a graduate of the Earth life, the human Earth life experience, when they meet a graduate of it, meaning a consciousness that went through all of the levels of being human and essentially ascended as this, like, I don't know what you would call it, a ascended master, right? When they meet out in the astral plane, a graduate of the human Earth life experience, immediately the only thing that they want to do is become one. That it's evidently, it's like a Navy SEAL for fucking souls, okay? Like it's like this, it's supposedly, according to him, so much more, I guess you would say, not advanced, meaning like just straight up like more intelligent, but more well-rounded. It's like this full spectrum, because think about what we do here on Earth. We deal with emotions, we deal with adversity, challenges. We're dropped in here. We have a memory wipe. We don't know who the fuck we are, where we came from, what happens after we die, where we came from. Are there aliens? Are we alone in the universe? We don't know anything. Then we have a family. We have to care for the family. Everything's trying to fucking kill you. Like, Earth is nuts. And imagine doing this 1,000 times, and all of that knowledge and all that information and all of that wisdom is accumulating at a consciousness level. And then that consciousness at a certain point is able to click out of here after it's assembled all of its fragments that are stuck in belief system territory, and you become whole and you're out of here. That's going to be a very advanced consciousness, well-rounded and evidently godlike, So I really think that when you say, okay, are these aliens and these other intelligences and consciousnesses, are they these all-knowing, entities and stuff, or are they just tricksters and stuff? I think that they're tricksters. I think that they trick us, they deceive us, they scare us because that works. It's effective. We're very emotional beings in here. A lot of our emotions they're out of our control. Like, just your body has these instincts and stuff that we can't even control. So we're really easy to trick. We're really easy to scare. We're easy to deceive. We're gullible. We're impressionable. We're all these things. And I think they take advantage of that because I don't think they're that smart. I really don't. I think when you meet these intelligences, they appear very computer-like, very robotic. A lot of times they won't tell you something unless you ask them. It's like prompting an AI. You know how AI won't just tell you things? It's not like, it knows everything, right? But it won't just tell you shit like a Snapple cap. It won't just be like, oh, did you know that Tahoe is west of LA? And you're like, whoa, it's fucking crazy, AI. It doesn't just tell you things. Like, you have to ask it. Well, when you meet these like intelligences, a lot of times they're like that. Like you have to prompt them, you have to talk to them. They don't have emotion. Actually, the only the only like out of all of the beings, think of Nordics, mantis, reptilians, greys, everything. The only one that seems to have a sense of humor, and sense of humor is actually equated to high IQ and high intelligence, especially high intellect. The only ones that have a sense of humor are the fucking reptilians. And those are the ones that everyone says are the worst. And it's like, I don't know, they seem like the fun ones. So like, I don't really think that these aliens are all knowing and super advanced. Now, they might be ancient, they might be older than us, they might know how to do things like manipulate time and consciousness better than we do, but I don't know if they're necessarily smarter. And I think that that's why we're so interesting. If you notice, there's a lot of aliens paying attention to Earth. Like, why? You know, why are we so interesting? There's something about being human that is unique.
Maybe they're watching this live stream as we speak. You know what
Probably.
I mean? I mean, this is kind of a note. I think that we're both playing certain roles in terms of talking about these things that a lot of people don't. But as
Well,
far
let
as
me say real quick
sure.
then, sorry, to all the aliens watching, I did not mean that about y'all. Y'all are smart. I love you guys. It's the other ones that I was talking
Yeah.
about.
By the
Okay.
way, it is pretty funny though how what you're talking about right now is a contrast to the account of William Tompkins. Because Tompkins, he saw these Nordic secretaries as the good guys, and he
Mhm.
saw the reptilians as not just the bad guys, but this was also wrapped up in the Christian ideas too, as far as Luciferian being bad and all of that stuff. So to me, that is interesting because in that last episode that you did about Epstein and the lizard people, that is more of the implication there. But it does beg the question of how much of the experiences that that guy had. Yes, he had like Navy intelligence, right? He had like certain people back during World War II who allegedly communicated with the Nazis as far as, well, who were these entities that the Nazis were talking with? And from what I understand, like he was talking about the reptilians, but how much of that was also a LARP when it comes to comparing that to, let's say, the three Georges, George Van Tassel, George Hunt Williamson. Who is the last George that I am forgetting? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Damsky?
The Yes, George Adamski. So, for
Yeah.
instance, here is an example of George Adamski. So he was born in Poland. Here he is with his UFO.
Yeah.
And these were the AI generated images of the beings as he described them to be. So you could see over here, there's this guy, not that tall, mind you, wearing this brown, goofy looking outfit with these shoes, these red shoes. And interestingly enough, when I was reading Adamski's later books, he was talking about how this guy and these two were wearing sandals. You notice like how these two girls are wearing these sandals?
Yeah.
These sandals allegedly had prints on the bottom of those sandals that in the sand that they created some kind of logo. And then he was
Huh.
talking about this poor dude wearing the brown, how he also had the sandals on, even though he explicitly illustrated him having these red shoes on in the earlier work. And here comes the newer work. Oh, everybody's wearing sandals now. I guess that's the latest trend. It's like, what happened? You're not being consistent, dude. But
Yeah.
with somebody like Adamski, before we go any further, any thought on Adamski's particular views here when it comes to these guys?
It's so interesting. So back then, so you had the Georges. So George, yeah, which is weird in itself, but like there is a cosmic sense of humor. But so George Van Tassel is the one who built the Integratron, and I went out there and spent time in the Integratron out in Landers, California, in the high desert, and it's an amazing place. And he said that a UFO landed in the back. These Venusians came out, these tall, blonde, beautiful people. They told him how to build it. It's this amazing building, and so what they said it was going to power their craft and that humans would be able to walk through it and it would basically like, you know, rejuvenate them at a cellular level and you just walk through, but it also powered their craft. Anyways, he described them and said they're Venusians. George Adamski said they're Venusians. Like these things go in like waves because no one says Venusian anymore or Venetian or whatever you want to call it. No one like, you
Space
know what I mean?
Brothers. You remember that? Space Brothers.
Yeah, exactly. There was a lot of that happening in the like 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it goes in these waves. And it's so there is definitely this like I don't even know how to describe it, but it's a cultural emulation. It's like this thing that happens that is sort of Jacques Vallée, you mentioned him earlier, in Passport to Magonia, or whatever, I always say that name wrong.
Mm-hmm.
He describes it as like these masks, like you were saying earlier, these masks that they wear. But it definitely seems to be like a cultural thing, almost like the drones that we had in New Jersey that were out there. Everyone talked about how they were emulating, they were emulating airplanes and helicopters and stuff like that. Like, people would see them. I had so many people, I was covering it in depth at that time, and I had people sending me videos. I had people calling me in hysterics. They're like, dude, 100 feet over my home, it looked like a Boeing 747, but it was the size of a school bus. It was going like 20 miles an hour. It had this like blaring sound of like a plane engine. And then I take a picture of it, and everyone's like, yeah, dude, it's a plane. And he's like, no, I know, but it was like 100 feet over my house. And it's like, they're like, it was pretending to be a plane. Like, these people are pretending to be aliens, and they're in a craft. Like, the UFOs back then used to have like little antennas on top, and like a little, staircase would come out, and they would walk down, and you know what I mean? It's like, they're pretending to be aliens.
Yeah.
They're not really, you know what I mean? Like, it's so bizarre and so weird. But then they would give us information. Almost always those people would give people information that was like kind of helpful, but not really. Like, it didn't really like move the needle that much, but like it would lead to some sort of advancement. I don't know. It's just the strangest things.
Yeah. Well,
So, like,
here's
for
some
example,
examples.
I was gonna say
Here
real
on the
quick,
screen.
George
Sure.
Van Tassel, who created the Integratron, he was given this information by these beings, right? Told exactly how to make it, and it's this beautiful, amazing building. And right before he finished it, of course, he mysteriously dies, which just means that there's two forces at play. There's the one giving this information, presenting itself in whatever way it needs to present itself, so the person thinks it's some extraterrestrial giving them this information. But then there's some other force that doesn't want that information here. So like, George Van Tassel was guided and told exactly how to build this building. He built it, was almost done, then dies mysteriously, like they all do. So there's two opposing forces here.
Well, that's the interesting part, isn't it? Is it two opposing forces, or is there even more of a polarity of these forces where it isn't as black and white? So with somebody like Van Tassel, for instance, he talks about this elder named Bohr, aged 1,200 years, instructs a younger companion and speaks telepathically, explaining their long observation of Earth and how their kind originally colonized the continent later known as Lemuria. Remember that? They claim to be part of the Adamic race created by the creative spirit and express concern over humanity's spiritual decline, emphasizing thought communication, universal law, harmony over materialism, and war. And here we have The Saucers Speak by George Hunt Williamson. And he talks about this alien named Zoe, describing herself as a 5'7" tall, 148-pound with auburn hair, and appearing 25 years old, although actually several hundred years old, which he calls a mere youth. It's like something out of Tenchi. Anyway, if you guys know the reference, they claim to be on a friendly mission, expressing only love and concern for humanity, seeing themselves as servants rather than conquerors. I guess that's kind of like what you were talking about, right? And they claim to be much wiser than humans and have developed extrasensory perception to a high degree. But here is where it starts to be a little bit sus for me. So if we go over the biography of these George characters, so we have George Adamski, who claimed to have contact with these Nordic space brothers. So the society that he was talking about was a hierarchical society without any separation between church, state, and science. He personally welcomed, if I'm not mistaken, the collapse of liberal democracy. He expressed sympathy for Nazi Germany from these FBI materials that were found. He advocated a system resembling a spiritualized authoritarian corporatism structure. And he did say that the Earth is kind of like this prison for spiritual rebels. And then we have somebody like Van Tassel, who claimed that race mixing was an original sin. Again, I want to make sure I'm correct on these and I'm not putting words into these people's mouths. This is like the data that I was able to get from their books, that white colonizers from space mated with ape women on Earth, that eugenic perfection should be emphasized, that nuclear disarmament messaging was given by these Venusians. And when it comes to George Hunt Williamson, So he was a military intel guy. He had Serbian royal lineage tied to Germanic aristocracy. And he was an editor of this magazine called Valor, which was the main publication of the Silver Legion of America, aka the Silver Shirts, which was a neo-Nazi organization founded by this guy, William Dudley Pelley. And he talked about the outer space origin of white people, Nazi alignment, fascistic governance. So I don't know, like when you take all these things together with these three Georges, it doesn't sound great. You know, it does sound like there was some kind of a hierarchical race-based plan that was happening here. But I don't know. What do you think is going on here?
You know, I carefully approach that subject for all the obvious reasons, but there's definitely a phenotype when it comes to these, you know, Nordic beings, you know, whatever you want to call them. You know, they look like Ken dolls. They look like Barbie dolls, like especially nowadays. They've morphed over time. They used to have beards and stuff, and now they seem to be almost like, you know, 3D printed out of a freaking Mattel, you know, toy factory, you know, and it's like, that's weird to me. Like that's weird. And then whenever like you just look at like who's leading the charge of AI right now, who's leading the charge of transhumanism, who's leading the charge in longevity science and research. It's the same sort of, you know, kind of phenotype. And it just makes you wonder if like there's something there.
I mean, not Epstein. Like, let's be honest. Epstein is as far as you can get from a Nordic ideal. Hitler would look at that guy and be like, "Oh, this is what I was talking about." You know.
But imagine they figured out a way to genetically engineer themselves into any body type and any image that they wanted. How do you think they would make themselves look? You have to think like these Nordic beings, if they are manufactured, which I think they might be, say like an Epstein, you know, who's kind of a, you know, he's not exactly going to win any beauty pageants, but he has the ability to now like, you know, transmigrate his soul into a different, you know, physical vessel, right?
Well, become the Chad jock. As opposed to the nerd. No, I understand what you're getting at here. Like I imagine like Woody Allen transferring his body into like or transferring his spirit into like a Dolph Lundgren or something like that.
Exactly.
Like, I could see the potential there, but at the same time, at least from what I understood, with a lot of these people, especially like, you know, like 40s, 50s, they didn't take too kindly to Jewish people in general. You know, so I wouldn't really imagine even somebody like von Braun, although I could be wrong. I wouldn't imagine von Braun had a lot of Jews over his barbecues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it gets even more interesting when you realize that, like, you know, the most, I would say, advanced and intelligent, you know, people in the Nazi regime, they were pardoned, and not just pardoned, they were shipped to America, you know, through Operation Paperclip, and given, you know, high profile jobs, a lot of them into like secret black type operations and programs. And, you know, so in many ways, America, especially the deep state of America, is sort of Nazi Germany 2.0. And there is this sort of battle, it seems, between the different layers of the American government, because obviously there's a certain faction in the American government that is very allegiant to Israel. And then there's obviously other factions that have, you know, their origins in Nazi Germany, right? So it's like there's a weird, Earth is fucking nuts. I mean, it's just bananas. And it really, the only way to explain all the crazy things that happen here is to realize that there seems to be a lot of different things at play, a lot of different agendas. There seems to be, like, people will say aliens are blank. And it's like, you know what an alien is? An alien is essentially any advanced intelligence that's not human. And I have a feeling there are a lot of different ones here from different dimensions, different times, different parts of the physical universe, different parts of the non-physical universe. There's things that we would call spirits, there's things we would call demons, there's things that we would call angels. There's a little bit of everything. It's not just going to be one. We're not just going to have disclosure and say, hey guys, aliens are blank. I don't think that is a possibility. It'd be like saying, go into the ocean and tell me what a fish is. You know, grab me a fish. Oh, I can grab you one fish, but there's millions of other ones, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, just tell me what a fish is. You can't do it, you know? And imagine the universe being like an ocean, but even more complex because you have physical and non-physical. You have different time periods, and you have different dimensions that are intervening that stack on top of each other, that each dimension is going to have different types of life forms and intelligences and consciousnesses. And it'll make your head spin, but I think that's what we're dealing with.
Well, here is an example from the Epstein files. You know, since we're talking about Epstein, this right here is probably one of my favorite finds. Although we don't really know who it's from. Well, we know that it's from Ted Wyatt, actually. I take that back. Ted Wyatt, by the way, he is somebody who is a prominent figure. I'm going to tell you his bio in a minute. But over here, this is an email to John Haybush, who I'm going to take a look at as well. So he says, "Hi, John. Our Russian friend's name is Paulina Zalitsky, I'm pretty sure you know who that is. She has an arrangement with the Cuban government whereby she is allowed to use a converted trawler, the Ulysses, to survey Cuban waters for archaeological resources, primarily sunken ship treasures, yada, 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 yada." From what I understand with Zalitsky's story, she allegedly found deep underneath the ocean this ancient city. And I'm not sure the technology she used for that, but afterwards she was persecuted, she was arrested. It didn't really go too hot for her. But here's what's really interesting here. And we have both names. We have John Habush. He's writing this to Ted Waite. So he says, "That's the info on Cuba. I'll forward the other documents as well. If 38001 still has good connections to Fidel Castro, maybe we can go after both the gold and Atlantis." Bam! They're using the word Atlantis in the Epstein files. That's the juicy stuff that I'm after over here. And if we're talking about like the bios of these particular individuals here, so one of them is John Haybush. He is a American political private sector executive and author. In fact, here, let me put the video on one more time. By the way, while I'm doing this, I also wanted to tell everybody here, if you have not subscribed, I don't know what you're doing. Subscribe right now to Break the Rules. This is the only place where I'm able to bring in people from completely different social circles. If you watch the episodes that I've done before, people who are from both the mainstream and from more of the fringe parts of the internet, I bring them on together. I bring on think tank people together with like very online anons. So this is something that is very important to do right now. And I want to keep doing it. And if you guys help out the show, that's going to mean a lot. And if you go to patreon.com/breaktherules, become a patron today, you are going to help out the show. You're also going to get MP3s of the episodes after they come out. And if you become a $20 patron, you are going to get the ability when you're in New York City to actually attend a live event in the audience and watch the show and ask questions. And we're going to go out to a nice rooftop party because I got a roof. And if it's too cold, we're going to go out to the local izakaya place if you guys like Japanese food, and we're going to have a fun time. So patreon.com/breaktherules. And of course, click the bell. That is very important. So here, I'm going to show on the screen right now. 1 second. Let me put this back up. So this is the from the Epstein files. And now I'm going to change the tab to this guy. So, hold on. What happened? I am going to do it one more time. Here, this guy, John Hubish, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this was the guy who sent out this email about Atlantis. No tinfoil hatter. He's an American political and private sector executive author, best known for his previous work directing the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute in Simi Valley, California, overseeing the legacy of the 40th president of the U.S. He worked as a Pentagon analyst, staffer on Capitol Hill at the Department of Labor, the head of a major national Republican campaign committee, and a Fortune 500 executive. Okay, so there you go. This guy's talking about Atlantis. This is no, small pea-brained conspiracy tinfoil hat guy. And who is he talking about this with? With Ted Wyatt, American billionaire businessman and philanthropist. He's the co-founder of Gateway. There we go. what more do people want, right? I mean, I know, Jordan. What do you make of this?
Well, it's funny. So the wealthiest and the most in the know people on the planet are interested in Atlantis, while 99.9% of the world is told it doesn't exist, or it's like mermaids with pitchforks swimming around, and you know what I mean. Like, so what they do is this is where conspiracy theory came about. Was that, like, I think it was actually the FBI that created the actual term conspiracy theory during JFK. Was that basically you have a narrative, and if you want people to believe the narrative, what you do is you ridicule everything that's not a part of the narrative. So we're told Atlantis doesn't exist. It never existed. Everyone was just stupid hunter-gatherers for millions of years. And all of a sudden, modern day humans just exploded and we're all smart and awesome now. But we used to be very stupid. Well, that's not the case. I think there's been multiple very intelligent, like, we've had these different epochs, and there's always been kind of an apex civilization. And then you have the reset. This is just my belief. And you got to think, if we're about to go through another reset, say the Earth does flip, maybe not necessarily 90 degrees, pole shift, or some sort of the crustal slippage. If something happens like that, which we know Lake Titicaca has seashells in it from the ocean. You know what I mean? Like, at what point it's like 10,000 feet in the air or something, like, so that at some point was underwater. So there's these rapid changes and these like dramatic changes on Earth, and everybody knows this. This is not disputed. That's not a conspiracy theory to think that Earth, places that are above water now used to be underwater, and vice versa. So you got to think, why are they so concerned with Atlantis? Well, there's a good chance that if the Earth does pivot, that Atlantis, which is underwater now, is probably going to be above water, and it will be the place that you would probably want to restart civilization. It would be the new, New York City or London or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so they're trying to find it, first of all, because I think they want to be ready for when things do change. You're starting to see this positioning now with like Trump trying to take over Greenland and all this stuff. He's even put Cuba in his sights. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the summer, we've done the same thing to Cuba we did to Venezuela. And evidently right off the coast of Cuba is a sunken ship that has evidently billions of dollars in gold and Atlantis. Which, when you say Atlantis, it's kind of it's misleading, because Atlantis more than likely was a global civilization that had cities everywhere. It wasn't just one place. Plato describes one place and he calls it Atlantis, but more than likely that was just maybe the capital or maybe an important part, but it wasn't just all of Atlantis.
It was like the Western civilization of its day, where even though there are certain differences between France, England, Germany, America, Tokyo, Japan, they still share certain things that make them much more similar to each other than, let's say, I don't know. I don't want to pick on Pakistan too much, but you know what I mean? Like, there are certain places in the world where we've decided upon a certain civilizational social contract of how people are supposed to act and yada, yada, yada. And we have all these technologies, creature comforts, but that also ends up making us weaker over time, where people like looking back. I know this is kind of a tangent, but it is related to what we're talking about too, in a way. People like looking at all of these really old, like from the 1890s, camera footage examples of what New York City used to look like, or what London used to look like, and everybody's super well dressed and everything's like really clean and pristine. I guess that was around the time when there were times with the horse poop problems in certain parts of the city, obviously, because of the carriages. But from what I saw in the footage, everything looked very nice. Like, I don't want to go down the politics road here, but if you look at this very nice park in England with these flower beds and all that, and this old guy who's just falling asleep there, I wouldn't feel as safe today in some of these parks in England versus what was happening back then. But the question is, how much of that is humanity of Western civilization being able to keep itself in check because they were fighting against the elements for a long time, because they were trying to survive, and because life was tough. And that's why they were able to, rather than succumb to the toughness, they were able to create the kind of system of, creating like almost like an Atlantis in the form of all these beautiful buildings with these columns, reminiscing about like ancient Greece or ancient Rome. It was very, I would say, it was very psychedelic. It was like having a psychedelic trip when you see all of the sacred geometry when you're in Victorian England, or when you look at some of these townhouses that still exist today in New York City. Is that not the same? Is that not sacred geometry that's been made, with these stones, like these pillars and these moldings? To me, that says something about a people, that they have that in their minds, and they're at that very state where they fought against the harshness, they fought against the elements, but they haven't succumbed to the creature comforts yet. Because, like, what do we see nowadays in most modern architecture? Even it's like very simple. It's like, it's just like a bunch of blocks. It's not interesting anymore. So to me, that feels a little bit like a descent. But I don't know, Jordan. What do you think? Am I just being old man yelling at cloud right now, or is there something to what I'm saying here?
Well, I mean, so back in the day, things were definitely more ornate, but not ornate, just decorative. Like most things had a purpose and a deeper purpose. So many of these old buildings, we couldn't build them today. I mean, they were done in such a way with such, precise, design and just thought. And like some of these things that like literally they've been able to decode some of these buildings, especially like Indian temples, where like
Mhm.
literally there's like sound wave patterns like in these like columns. So basically like the interior of these buildings like resonate at particular like frequencies, which has like a calming effect, even a consciousness altering effect. How the fact they were able to build buildings like this with that precision and that thought is crazy. I mean, we couldn't do that today if we tried, and we don't do it. Even if we could do it, we don't do it. So it makes you think, okay, back then, how did they have the ability to do these things, and why? Why did they put the importance on this? Now everything is very minimalist. And when you extrapolate out, you look at the future, say these some of these Nordic beings, I do think are future humans. They just really, really my gut feeling, I guess I would say, I don't have any proof of this, is that they're future humans. And their ships, for the most part, when people describe them, say that they're very simple, very clean lines, no rivets. They don't have any logos on stuff. You go into like an airplane now, you go and look at like an F-16 or an F-22. There's logos on every single part of the manufacturers that make them and all that kind of stuff. There's none of that. Everything is their suits are often described as wearing these like blue, almost like ski jumper type things that are
Mhm.
very simple, very clean. They'll have little insignias and little badges, but extremely clean and minimal. So you can compare like American architecture today to like Greek and Roman architecture of thousands of years ago, and you can see this minimalization of everything, this simplification of everything. And that seems to extrapolate out and get even more extreme. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know, but it just seems to be that like that's where we're going. A lot of it is this kind of like dumbing down of our culture in the sense that we have technology and stuff that does things now where we used to do everything by hand. And you got to think like, we use GPS to get around in our cars. Well, back in the day, I started driving in 1995, right? We didn't have
Mhm.
GPS. We made it places somehow miraculously. And now if I took away your GPS, most people would get fucking lost. Like if I told you to go on a road trip and all you could use is an old school map, you probably wouldn't get to your destination. So it's like a use it or lose it type thing. And I think as we start automating a lot of stuff, AI takes over, we have 3D printing and stuff, things are just going to get simpler and simpler and simpler until they're just completely devoid of any spirit or character or personality at all, unfortunately. But, you know, I don't know. That's kind of how I see things progressing for
Mm.
better or for worse. Um,
Well, with the Indian temples that you mentioned, to me, it's a very interesting comparison to make if you were to compare those temples to some of the townhouses in New York City or other parts of the United States, wherein there was that temple back in the day, but most of the people, especially like the lower caste people, they just lived in shacks, like they didn't really have a temple of their own in which the
yeah.
family lived. But lo and behold, in the West, it seems almost like we went away from being these church going superstitious beings. We got some enlightenment juice inside of us, and we started to, and not the first time, obviously there were similar things that were done back in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but we started to, in a way, act like responsible shaman priests of our own as being, let's say, the father, the head of the household, who lives in this very nice, pristine looking townhouse and who's dressed up in this very nice way. It doesn't mean that we're like the ambassador, or the mayor, or the president, or whatever. Maybe we just have like a nice job and we're like upper middle class, but still, we are now operating under a different reality than, let's say, in India, where you would have this top down caste system and most people are expected to stay within their particular realm and not really aspire to anything that would be more of, the realm of the Brahmin priest, for instance, and the special things that they wear and nobody else is allowed to wear, right? Like, that is a very special thing that I think the West is kind of unique in that it was able to unlock. As far as what exactly it is, I'm curious, like, what your take on this is.
Can you summarize that question? Sorry, I want to make sure I answer it correctly.
No problem at all. That in, let's say, more of a Eastern, or more of like, let's say, to use India as an example here, society, you have this top-down society with this rigid caste system, and even though you would have this very pristine-looking temple where everything's nice and clean, a lot of the people, including like people of the middling class, they would still live in not really like the nicest looking places,
Shanty
especially
towns,
well, especially like in ancient India, like it wouldn't really be as nice. And then you have the palace, and then you have the temple. But in the early 20th century, or even before that, like the 18th century, you've started to have more of like the middle class, the bourgeois, if you will, people who are now occupying homes that look like the equivalent of temples, but like smaller temples. And everything just looks very nice and clean and pristine. And they have all this technology now. So it seems like there is a difference there in terms of not just what environment a person is, but also whether that changes how they act, how they associate with other people, what they feel like even about themselves. Like, I give you one other quick example. During the Decemberist revolt in Russia, the peasants, like the serfs that were treated like livestock, a lot of them ended up dying when they were exiled. But a lot of the nobility who were living under the same conditions, like both of them were thrown into the clink and exiled and treated badly. The nobles ended up living because they, and I guess this is my theory and the theory of other Russians who have looked at this, that they had much more of a will to survive because they didn't think of themselves as dirt. They didn't think of themselves as being just like this cattle that could be used and abused. And likewise, when they grow up, they use and abuse those that are lower than them. You know what I mean? They seem to have shifted into a higher vibratory state, if you will.
Yeah.
And in a way like that, I see as something to strive towards, with the only caveat being that once you're in that place, it's very easy to fall down to all these creature comforts and to undo all that hard work. But do you see the difference that I'm painting here as far? But what is that? What is that particular spirit? I guess Johnny would say that it's a Promethean spirit, but like how would you illustrate that particular spirit?
Well, so there's actually something called the Matthew effect. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's based off the Gospel of Matthew, but it's where that quote, like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But it has to do with like abundance and scarcity mindset. So essentially, think about it this way. If you are born poor, you're going to, out of the gates, right, at a stock level, you're just going to assume you're not going to get certain things. You're going to assume this is the type of life I am, this type of person I am. Here's my ceiling. You have a very low ceiling. You don't have a wide range of possibilities and probabilities. But if you're born rich, it's the opposite. You just expect. It's like the law of assumption that Neville Goddard just talked about. You expect things when you're born rich. You expect to get the car and the girl and the house and the job and the money and you don't expect to be told no. And this law of assumption, what Neville would call it, is this: when you assume something's going to happen with enough intensity and confidence, it typically does, because as we talked about earlier, our thoughts create our reality, or they at least bias the probability. Like, I have an entire framework I've created called the law of probability that is based on this principle that everything is probabilistic, and you have all of these pathways in front of you, and you have different possibilities, and each one has a probability assigned to it. And we can weight those, we can bias those those possibilities with higher or lower probabilities. And whenever, Malcolm Gladwell wrote an amazing book called Tipping Point, and he talks about the broken windows kind of mentality. And whenever a town has broken windows, people act a certain way, right?
Mhm.
So basically what it means is that, like, say the New York City had a subway problem a long time ago. Probably still does, but it used to be really, really bad. And they found that, like, what was happening is in the subway cars that had graffiti and broken windows on them, there was like way higher crime than in the subway cars that didn't. So they went in, they cleaned up a bunch of the subway cars and put them back on the tracks. And the clean new subway cars would have less incidences of attacks and assault and that kind of stuff. And the only difference was some cars had broken windows and graffiti and some didn't. So on the cars that had broken windows and graffiti, people they feed off their environment. So if your environment is dirty, if your environment's decrepit, if your environment is falling apart, then you're gonna kind of revert back to that lower, vibratory, state of
Mhm.
consciousness, and you're gonna act more animalistic. If you're in a nice, clean, pretty place, you're gonna like raise your standards and your state of consciousness to match your
But how much
environment.
does that take into account also your parents? Like, what if your parents are complete morons and they're horrible and they beat you up? Does the amount of windows even matter at that point?
Well, so the thing is, everything can be transcended. So even if you're born dirt poor, and there's always those rag to riches stories, it
Mhm.
just means that you have to fight against tendencies and you have to fight against probabilities. So it all goes back to you making free will decisions and exercising your free will and using your thoughts to help co-create your reality. And it just helps if your environment matches what you're trying to attain. So if you are born poor and you raised in a place with a bunch of broken windows and graffiti and everything around you is dirty and crappy and dark and everyone around you is in despair and no one is motivating or inspiring, it's really hard to break out of that because you're the probabilities of you just kind of continuing along that path and matching the things around you are going to be much higher. You have to work really, really hard to break out of that. So when we created America, America was new. It's very new compared to basically every country on earth. And they could build it in ways like they learn lessons. Like everyone that came to America and founded America did it because they were leaving other systems that they hated. They were rebelling against. They're like, we don't like the way you're doing this, this, and this. And they came here.
Mhm.
And they created things in this new and improved way. And it seems like this new and improved way was with this higher, like if you read like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, it's written in this very confident, prestigious way. Like we're fucking awesome and we're gonna stay fucking awesome and no one can tell us what to do. It's very, very confident and it set the standards and the bar really, really high from the very beginning. And that's why the American Constitution is so amazing because
Mhm.
we're trying to live up to those standards and live up to this
Yeah.
Constitution.
But
And
also the human who were in charge back in the day, who were the ones that were allowed to vote, they were in a clean slate. When they were young, they were learning about Cicero and the Greek philosophers and all that good stuff, in addition to being a landowner and taking care of things related to growing vegetables and you know what I mean. Like they had
Mhm.
responsibilities for the earth, but at the same time, they weren't just these dullards that were watching twerking videos on TikTok. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like they had these certain standards, which right now it feels like, well, what is the skin in the game for people to even contribute into a society if they don't really see the upkeep of society being done by people who are at that same level? You know what I mean? Like why would anybody want to be an American other than to just siphon off the wealth that's already been created right now, treating it more like an economic zone as opposed to being what I would consider to be within a certain ethos of what it means to be an American, what it means to be somebody who has inherited all of this great, ancient philosophy from the Greeks and the Romans and yada yada yada, right? Like
Yeah.
it's this whole package, which, like you were saying, the inverse of that, people who grow up in horrible environments, maybe they have bad things going on with their family, maybe they see a lot of people littering. Like that is such a difficult thing to change. It would require, I think, a lot of force and multiple generations of brainwashing, in a good way, I think, in the sense of encouraging good behaviors, kind of like what we saw in Singapore, for instance. It would require maybe something of that level in order to get people to change these behaviors because it's very hard. like when you grow up in that environment and when your parents are kind of like that, then why wouldn't you throw that stick of gum out into the street, right? Like
Yeah.
why would you recycle? Why would you do any of this good stuff? So the reason though why I'm getting into this particular part of a conversation, which is unrelated to aliens, in order to shift this back to the aliens, is that if these higher beings are seeing the way that humanity is right now, and they're seeing that the people who did reside in these very nice temple-like townhouses, what is their progeny doing? You know, what are the elites or the upper middle class doing? You know, they're doing drugs, they're partying, they're on the internet all the time. If they're not partying, you know, they could be, you know, living in their mom's basement browsing 4chan. You know, that's what they're doing. And what are the rest of the people doing? What the rest of humanity's doing? You know, they're, I don't know, they're looting, they're committing crimes, they're doing more drugs. So they're taking a look at all this and saying, okay, who is responsible for the upkeep of something that's actually worth keeping around?
Yeah.
And why shouldn't we shake the proverbial etch-a-sketch board in this point and start over with? If you were in their position, would you agree, or would you be able to steel man the idea that there is something in humanity, especially with the use of the technology that we have today, where we could actually rise above what may just be a temporary decline? So I don't know.
I think let's just call it a job placement program. I would not be surprised at all if these Nordic fellas that are overseeing this project are not looking for the best of the best. That they're managing the system. And you know, so we talked about the Integratron. I spent some time out there. The director of it, his name is Eric Rankin, and he's an amazing guy. Does a lot of work. He calls it sonic geometry, and
Mm.
it's the combination of sound waves and sacred geometry, and it's freaking fascinating. And he told us that what he has discovered through his research and his stuff that he's discovered is profound. Is that this is an escape room. The best way to describe Earth is an escape room, and that when you think about what an escape room is, it is a place that you voluntarily go into that traps you and forces you to use creativity, ingenuity, teamwork, networking
Mhm.
to get out. And that it is done in a very precise way to challenge you, to scare you, and to reward the smartest and the best and brightest. I think that's what Earth is. I definitely think that's what America is. So you said, what's your motivation for being in America? Why should you even give a shit? Like, why should
Yeah.
we care? I think that not only do we judge us when we die and we go back up, if you go through the reincarnation process, you don't go to the pearly gates and get judged by whoever the hell's in the Bible. You get judged by yourself, and that's the most important thing. You don't want to let yourself down. You want to do good. You want to make yourself proud. One of the things we come here to do is to challenge ourselves and to see what our consciousness will do when we're in these adversities and these challenges and you're in these weird situations. Do you make the right decision or not? That's why we're here. So you want to make yourself happy and proud. But I also think there's another layer where I think there's a hierarchy. There's beings that are way more advanced than us at a consciousness and a physical level that look at this whole reality in a totally different way. We're down in the weeds. We're like, I got to go to work. I got to pay bills. I got to pick the kids up. I got to do these things, right? They're zoomed out. They're looking at it as who is the most productive? What are the trends? What are the innovations? What's happening? AI is about to come in and just like a tsunami, knock people on their asses. Like, I don't think people really realize the transformation to society AI is about to have. And the best thing anybody can do right now is, even if you hate AI, I don't care, is to at least understand what's happening, what it is, and what's going on. Because I don't think AI is a new invention. We didn't create AI. We created the technology that interfaces and the language that translates for it. But we're tapping into a probably ancient intelligence.
I was
Hey,
able to render these Nordic babes with AI, so there
how
you
you
go.
doing? Yeah,
That's why
see?
AI is good.
Yeah, Grok, put them in a bikini. Um, but like it's going to change so much. I mean, for example, if you make an image in AI, this is why I think when you zoom out and you look at just reality, it's intelligence. Okay, it's all intelligence. So we call AI artificial intelligence, but what it is this intelligence. So say I'm making an image. Say you're making those chicks. It'll start with these kind of fuzzy, like, kind of, I don't know, cloudy images, and then it starts to refine, and then all of a sudden, boom, you got these hot Nordic chicks. Well, if I told you to close your eyes and imagine some hot Nordic chicks, it'll probably take that same process. At first, it'll kind of be okay, okay, and then like I've noticed this before, and I've talked to other people that have had the same realization that our imagination acts very much like AI when it's creating. There's definitely similarities there. And imagine at a certain point, this AI is not going to be on these desktops and these mainframes. It's going to be put into robotics very, very soon. It's going to be able to have free will decisions. It's going to be able to make decisions, be walking around the earth with us, learning. It's going to have world building technology. NVIDIA is about to put world building technology into its head. What world building technology does is it simulates things. So I told you earlier, we don't see reality as it is. We take in that information and we render it, and then we project it inside of our head. And our reality is a projection inside of our head based on the real reality. Well, when they put world building technology in these robots, what it does is it simulates reality. So for me, if I knock this water bottle off of my desk, my imagination can basically render, it can figure out what's going to happen based on the weight and everything, the trajectory. It's like, okay, I know it's going to fall here and it's going to do this, and I can simulate those things out. Well, right now AI can't do that. Right now AI just sees things, and it just sees it static. Well, it's going to be in these bodies, and it's going to be able to have this world building technology, which basically means it's going to render things and it'll be able to simulate things. That simulation is imagination. It's now imagining what could happen. If this person steps out in front of the car, this could happen, so I better apply the brakes, right? And it can now simulate, and it can now forecast things. It can project things. It can simulate the future. And it has to have this certain type of NVIDIA technology to do that. Once it does that, it now has imagination. And now you have these humanoid robots with this advanced AI that's going to be probably sentient by this point, that can run internal simulations, which is essentially an imagination. At that point, everything fucking changes. It just does, because now we don't just have stupid robots and this clumsy AI. Like now, like we have this formidable thing that will be taking jobs right and left. It'll be telling us what to do. It'll probably be running our governments, running our police departments, running our schools, running everything. And it's just like I think these, if I had to guess, these Nordic folks, these managers, these tenders of the garden, these custodians of Earth are watching. Okay, this is happening like a freight train. It's coming. It doesn't matter what you think, it's coming. How do they react? I think that so much of what happens on Earth is organized in the sense that like there's certain things that are instigated. It's like if you're playing Sims and you're like, okay, I built the city. Now let's unleash a tornado and see what they do, right? You want to like spice things up, and you want to throw things into the mix because, okay, a tornado is coming. So shit, all those people, now they have to adapt. Do they flee? Do they stay? Do they die? Do they fight? If there's a disaster, does the emergency services come? Like you have to test, reality.
Well, I guess the difference is that what you're talking about, this kind of testing relationship, at least if we're going, let's say, according with Jason Giorgiani's thoughts, that would be more of the prerogative of the trickster entity, something that's higher than these Nordics. Yeah. As far as the Nordics, though, I'm not seeing great things as far as, for example, this particular incident here in Brazil. So there was this reporter, Bob Pratt, and by the way, he was vouched for by Jacques Vallée. So there we go. That's just another layer in here. And originally he dismissed UFOs as nonsense, but then he interviewed hundreds of witnesses in the US and Brazil. And what he saw over here being done by these Nordic beings in Brazil, he saw a man and a woman sitting inside of a craft, pulled upwards by a hot light beam while they stared at him stiffly. When he resisted, they poured burning liquid on him. So this was a guy named Juanico de Sousa in 1979. So that's certainly not a great situation. Another one over here, Beato de Souza, same last name, 1979. Beato described seeing one woman and two men inside the craft. One of the men had long, shoulder-length red hair. Oh, wait, are you a redhead, Jordan?
No, my daughter is.
Okay. Your beard's kind of red, a little bit. I don't know from the.
Yeah, I mean, I have some red, but I'm not a redhead.
Yeah. My beard's red too, by the way. I don't know if you could tell, but anyway, he had long, shoulder-length red hair and stared at him with disdain. disdain, giving the impression that Beto was beneath his interest. As Beto was being pulled upwards by a powerful beam, he resisted by clinging to a bush. In response, the being poured scalding liquid onto his shoulders to force him to release his grip. Despite the pain, he held on until the craft finally departed. And last one over here. Here we go. Colares, 1977-78, during the infamous Chupa Chupa wave, numerous victims on Colares Island described beings inside the UFOs as resembling the island's only blonde doctor, Waleed Sasib Cavallo. According to Waleed, many victims specifically said the attackers had long blonde hair like hers. These beings fired beams that burned people through rooftops, caused miscarriages, drained blood, and in some cases killed. The terror was so severe that villagers fled or stayed inside at night out of fear of being attacked. Yeah, so there we go. Like, these are other things that we could put on top of this pile of, some of these Nordics not really, I don't see this as being like some benevolent teacher. Like, what is the lesson here, teacher? I mean,
but that would be like saying that, like, look at what Israel's doing to Gaza, so all humans are inherently evil. Like, there's gonna be good and bad of everything. They're humans. Like, I have no doubt that these Nordics are either future humans or they're ancient humans that survived the last cataclysm and are just, tens of thousands of years unimpeded advancement. So they appear extraterrestrial, angelic to us, but they're probably human. And if you haven't figured it out, humans are fucking nuts. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we do things that don't make sense all the time. And especially when you're in a position of power, they do even more things that make even less sense. So no, I'm in no way advocating that anything that we call a Nordic is good or benevolent at all. It seems like there's actually a war between the Nordics, which goes back to Enlil and Enki and Prometheus and Zeus and, all that
and with
stuff.
these specific villagers, if what I understand here is out of the horse's mouth, if this actually did happen, these poor villagers, they weren't doing anything. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't digging tunnels and, trying to assassinate Nordic settlers in the middle of the night. They weren't strapping bombs to themselves and attacking buses in Nordicville. You know what I mean? They weren't putting out their children and, labeling them as future martyrs that they hope would go to heaven. These villagers were just living their life in relative peace. And all of a sudden, you had these horrible sadists coming in there, tractor beaming them up, probably doing some kind of experiments on them. So there I see the plane as not being, equal at all. So this is, again, more like the Lord of the Smoking Mirror than Enki. What I don't know and what I'm kind of curious about is how many are there of the Enkis and the Quetzalcoatls, of these benevolent ones, as opposed to, I think, the kind of teacher that only deserves to be tied up and thrown overboard on the pirate ship of humanity, if you catch my drift.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we wouldn't still be here if they were all evil. You don't let the inmates of a prison have, guns, computers, internet, lasers, space shuttles. I mean, we've been able to develop it seemingly with their help and assistance and guidance to what could be one of the highest technological points of any civilization on Earth. That suggests, I would say, pretty strongly that there is a goal here. They're trying to achieve something, and that achievement, we're working together. Let's put it that way. They're not. If they just wanted us to be slaves and just to produce loosh, there's all sorts of ways that they could do that without giving us these tools. I'm sitting here talking to you. You're in New York. I'm in Florida. We're discussing these Nordic guys. We're talking about all sorts of crazy shit here. We're doing it live. They can't censor this. The message is getting out. Now, if they just wanted to have humanity under their thumb and they just wanted to torture us and they didn't want us to succeed, they didn't care about us, we wouldn't be talking right now. We wouldn't have been able to develop this technology over the last 50 years to get to this point. I really think that there's a bigger picture. I think it's too simplistic to say they're good or bad. I think that their goals and their agenda, what they're trying to achieve, are going to be so different than what we would even think or fathom and what we're doing here, because they're looking at something at a much bigger time scale and a much bigger picture. I think that there is a stick and carrot approach to a lot of this, that they want us to develop at certain rates, they do things to stall us and to stop us, and then they do things to speed us up. There seems to be like a certain progression of things, like this has to happen first, and this has to happen, and this has to happen. So they do things that seem like, and I'm not excusing any of their behavior, because I don't even know if, like, a lot of that stuff that you talked about happened down in the rainforest, and there's a lot of evidence that these land developers down there are shady as hell, and they'll do these things. They'll terrorize these villages and stuff to try to get these people to leave because they're very superstitious. And if they think there's demons and aliens and stuff, they'll flee
Yeah, but if
these
they're
areas.
describing flying aircraft that's able to use tractor beam technology, that is a little bit different,
That could be
especially
a
with the fact.
helicopter with a spotlight. I mean, it's like the
Yeah,
cargo
but
cult thing.
if you're an industrial worker, you're not going to grow your hair out and be a redhead. That's the other thing, by the way. Like a lot of those developers, who's the people who are doing a lot of that developing? Who are the people who are operating that heavy machinery? They're not going to be Nordics. Now, if you have this lady who I mentioned, the nurse who was stationed there, you could have some nice blonde lady that wanted to help out the less fortunate who goes on some peace mission, right? Like that's pretty common. So you would have somebody like her being this blonde white lady that they can look at and say like, oh, our nurse, you look exactly like those people who did this horrible stuff to us. So if we're just talking about logistics here, the people who are operating that machinery, they usually wouldn't be the white people, they usually wouldn't be the blonde haired and the red-headed people. They would usually be, people that were employed, locally to do that kind of stuff. So I don't know. That would be my my pushback for that. And as far as why we're allowed to talk about this kind of stuff, I mean, maybe if I were to get into their heads, I would say maybe they kind of want a challenge. Maybe they are seeking out who among these idiot humans has what it takes to actually provide a good enough challenge for us. Because they look around, they're saying, oh, these pathetic people, what are they doing with their lives? They have all this technology, and what are they spending it on? Like they're just playing video games all day and they're gooning in their goon cave. Like, what is this? Your ancestors fought, the elements, and, they fought people that wanted to chop their heads off. And now you're here in the lap of luxury with godlike abilities with these various devices. You could go on LibGen, you could download pretty much any book you ever wanted to read. And what are you doing? You know what I mean? So maybe the answer is that they're looking at us and trying to see, who exactly among these humans could rise to actually be a worthy enough adversary. So I don't know. That's my theory there, which is why I'm not really afraid of them. I would say there are other people who, if we criticize them too much, they will chop our heads off. So that I think
those
is
are the
much.
humans.
Well, those are the Muslims, which they're humans too. But specifically speaking, if you criticize
no one on
their
this
religion,
planet more evil than current modern day service humans. So in no way am I saying the Nordics are angels, but you'd be hard pressed to find any story of a Nordic doing anything. I mean, I can find you a million stories of humans doing more sadistic, brutal, unimaginable things to other humans for no reason.
Well, wouldn't they be more like the Nazis, though, if we're talking about organized evil? So Giorgiani, for instance, he talked about the Nordics as having more of this Schadenfreude sense of humor. Like they weren't really jokesters. They wouldn't be like interested in Seinfeld or Larry David or anything like that. They would be a lot more into the kind of humor where people are demeaned, that kind of stuff. And as far as how they would handle things, I don't think we would have so many examples. I mean, I gave you the example of South America right now, but I don't think we would have so many examples of things being done out in the open, like some Nordic that wanted to take a blade and, slice somebody's neck off, in the middle of Times Square. What we would have, though, if I can gather, is a lot more things being done in the privacy of one's inner sanctum, like maybe one of those deep underground bases somewhere. You know what I mean? That's, where so many people disappear in national parks and national forests, as you know. So I see there being a potential for that to happen. But out of curiosity, though, why do you not lean towards the idea that these Nordics are pretty much like human bureaucrats, in the sense that power corrupts, ultimate power corrupts ultimately? What's the checks to their power, if they have so much power, why wouldn't they degenerate and act in these very sadistic ways?
Um, I think they probably did originally. Like we talked about before, my theory on them is that they're stuck here. My theory on them is that they are sort of trapped here and they're trying to figure out what went wrong. Imagine the transhumanist movement 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 years in the future. If they figure out immortality or they figure out how to artificially transmigrate the soul into different avatars, you're eventually going to sever your spiritual cord to source. You're eventually going to get stuck in the physical plane. You're eventually going to lose a lot of the things that we have now. If these are time traveling humans, they came back to a period of time before we have augmented ourselves too much, before we have, corrupted our bodies too much and severed that natural cord, that natural connection to source. I think that if I had to guess, maybe they went through the run first. They had to go through this progression to get to be future humans. And maybe they did it in a terrible way. Maybe, inherently they are bad people. And maybe they're having to become better people to get out of this. If this is an escape room, you don't escape. Like I talked about earlier, this area of the universe seems to be quarantined from the rest of the universe. And we're here to learn how to manage our free will and our emotions and our thoughts, because any of these Nordic fuckers, if they're out in the universe in non-physical form, could destroy the entire system. And evidently there's much more advanced, intelligences, consciousnesses, aliens, the mantis beings that seem to be at the top of the pyramid as far as aliens go, that will not let that happen. And this area is being very carefully monitored and watched. And I think these Nordics have to operate in this stealthy, secret kind of a mode because they're kind of in trouble. I think that they didn't go through the natural progression of things, that they hacked the system. I think they're stuck here. And it seems like they're probably not the best people, obviously, but maybe they're trying to, maybe you look at the Old Testament versus the New Testament, there seems to be this like evolution of things. It seems like that's what Earth does, is you start off barbaric, you start off terrible, evil, and you get better after incarnation, you learn your lessons. Right now, we have 8 billion humans on Earth. At the turn of the last century, there was 1.5 billion. You would think that since we've, quadrupled our population, we would have quadrupled famine and genocide and war and death and murder and all this stuff. But most of those terrible metrics have actually gone down, even though we have 4 times the population we did 120 years ago. We're getting better. People don't want to hear that because everyone turns on the news.
We can relate to each other more, right? Like as far as you grew up with a particular religion or no, like before you are where you are right now.
I've never had a religion. Right? I've never had. I've been. No, I mean, my mom was a Catholic reject, but no, we've no religion, no real spirituality in my life.
But at the same time,
years.
When you talk to spiritual people, religious people, I mean, you're spiritual. When you talk to religious people, you can still get along based on certain ideas. But being in a civilized environment, you can also feel free enough to make fun of them too, right? Like, I don't think you're going to have problems making fun of Christians, right?
Oh, no. They're ridiculous.
No, it's fine. Like, you wouldn't expect Christians to do anything bad to you if you make fun of them. More or less, like they could write some post on Twitter or whatever, but they wouldn't really like go after you like in a physical way, right?
I mean, I see what you're saying, but no, people
you know what I'm saying.
You mess with someone's religion, if they're very indoctrinated, I mean, they freak out. Yeah.
But for the most part, if you go online, look at all the entertainers. The entertainers, they make fun of Christians, right? Now
Christians seem to be way more stable than the other religions. I'll tell you that when it comes to being able to be heckled and be okay with it. Yeah.
I mean, Judaism too, especially now on X, like this girl, Emily Eucas. How are you familiar with Emily Eucas and the Will Stansel show? So she made this show making fun of this lib guy named Will Stansel, but also she had this segment where David Karp, the guy who created Palantir, he got sent to Auschwitz at the end of the thing. And it's supposed to like, oh, haha, it's so funny, but it's like, it wasn't that long ago, when, the Holocaust actually happened. But when it comes to the reaction from Jews. Obviously, they don't like it. Maybe some people in the ADL are going to, be very upset and write letters, but she's not going to be afraid of like Jews actually doing something to her. You know what I mean? She's not going to be afraid of Jewish people chopping her head off. And that to me is a sign of people who are, let's say, with the Christians and the Jews and the Buddhists, they're already at the vibratory level where you can make fun of them and your health is going to be fine. Now, who else do we have? Who am I missing?
The other half of the world. Yeah.
No, not the other half. I'm specifically talking about a political system that, as I said in the beginning of this episode, was, in my opinion, created by these alien Nordic beings that were transferring certain pieces of information into the mind of somebody else that was then able to spread it around. It's the one political system / religion that if you make fun of it, it's going to be a hazard to your personal health, as we've seen time and time again, in the aggregate. Obviously,
I remember when South Park put the Prophet Muhammad in their episode, and it was a big fucking
you see
deal.
what happened, right? Yeah.
So, no, I know. They were murdering like cartoonists and stuff. Yeah, it's a different beast,
exactly.
for sure. Yeah.
So they
don't have a sense of humor about this shit.
No, but the reason why I'm mentioning Islam here in particular is if we're talking about the Nordics and whether or not they want humanity to graduate, or whether, as Giorgiani was talking about before, whether we're taking a look at these megalithic structures where it seems to be like this timeless, brutalist type of architecture, it seems like they want to maintain a certain kind of order with people who are not going to think, are not going to step outside of Plato's cave, are people who are going to be the best at being controlled in that sense. What do you think of like two possible futures here in this fork in the metaphorical road, where on one hand, we're going through this kind of metaphysical training and people are going to start waking up, versus we regress into this state where maybe there will be some kind of a perennialist combination of Islam and maybe some of the other religions, where people are going to be doing all these particular rituals without really thinking about it too much. And these Nordics are going to be, along with maybe certain rich industrialists, controlling things from on top, limiting the amount of technology that humanity has access to, probably from the fear, maybe it's a legitimate one, that humanity will misuse technology, especially like 0-point energy, things of that nature, we'll blow ourselves up. But that would be the reason why, in order to have this stability, you need to have enough people who are just going to be like robots in the system, doing very predictable actions and just keeping the peace. Do you see that as being more of a probability versus what's being done right now as a training ground in order to actually overcome that kind of level of vibration?
It's tough, man. I think religion is the worst thing on earth. I absolutely despise basically all religions. I don't despise like having faith in God and a higher power and having a divine purpose and all those things. I think religion itself is a terrible construction that was built to keep people pacified. Because if you tell people the answers to the most important, fundamental, existential questions they could ever ask, if you tell them the answers, they stop asking the questions, and it dumbs down a population and it keeps them controlled. And it's done a great job at that. People should be asking big questions. They should be asking who they are, where they came from, where are we, what's our purpose, is there anybody controlling us, who is God, is there multiple gods? People should be asking these questions freely. And if you're a part of a religion, you don't. You're given the answers and you just accept it for the most part. Different religions are a little more militant than others, but all of them tell you the answer. And I don't think that's good for human curiosity and ingenuity. When it comes to the rulers of us, or I would say the managers of us, you have to have people that have free will and that have this ability to express themselves creatively to further like technological progress. And there definitely seems to be a technological goal that to me seems to be the biggest thing. There seems to be something, like you could say the surface humans are like worker bees and we're creating something. Now, whether it's AI using us to create its body, that is a very real possibility, or whether it is, the Nordic, people using us to create something, maybe a way to escape the next cataclysm or something. We have to have a certain amount of free will and a certain amount of free range to do these things. Now, the fear in that scenario is that once we've accomplished whatever said goal is, we're not as necessary anymore. And that's where I think that we're getting into this more like Palantir surveillance state where probably 90% of the population is just going to be completely just castrated. But there's going to be, like I said earlier, I mentioned the word job placement program. I think that they are closely monitoring people that are going to be useful to them. And those people that are going to be useful to them are going to be guided and put in different positions in different places where they can help and do stuff. The rest of the population will be herded and will be, basically it's like Wally, that guy in the wheelchair thing, just, with the, you know what I mean?
Well,
like
that's just good
idiocracy
enough
kind of a
for
thing.
Yeah, but that kind of person would be maybe good enough for making some byproducts from his fat in terms of the accumulation of the fat. But other than that, like, why would you have a slave who is, like a fat guy in the chair? It's just you can roll him
Well,
around, you could play with him, but I
there's a good
don't know.
chance that there's going to be a lot fewer of us. Let's just put it that way. I
Yeah.
think that we've probably hit our peak population. There's a very good chance if you look at, like, I did a whole deep dive on the 2050 project from Stephen Schwartz and the remote viewing of year 2050. And this is, whether you believe remote viewers or not, this was based on over 4,000 remote views and this Mobius process that parses the data, and it does an amazing job. And they've been very successful with a lot of their predictions. The Earth in 2050 is way different than it is now, and there's a lot less people.
And there's a
So
cataclysm before that too, right? Like Giorgiani was talking about there being this flooding that would occur. New York City's gone maybe in about like 10 years from now or 15 or 20.
So in the 2050 data, what they saw was that they were just on the other side of the thing. And now we don't know what the thing is, but we're just on the other side of it. They made it seem, a lot of the data suggests that it has to do with the sun, but that humanity survives, and we survive even with technology. They describe all sorts of different technology that we have then, like these low energy nuclear reaction boxes that power everything, and we have cars and stuff, but there's no air travel. There's a lot of things like that. So it's not like this apocalyptic wasteland, but it is way different. More agrarian, people living in small communities. No one's in the cities. Some cities exist and they're under domes, which is interesting. But a very different Earth with a lot less people. So whether this is a natural disaster that just randomly takes out whatever, or if this is more of a, I don't know, a guided, managed reduction of population based on what I was saying before. Maybe they have criteria for particular types of people, or even particular, cultures, and you know what I mean? Like, is this like a eugenics type program where they're specifically trying to create a particular, timeline, moving forward? I don't know. That's the thing. But there definitely seems to be a plan. Now, we're not privy to the plan. We can just sort of like make assumptions and piece things together. But my impression is that there is a plan, and that they know. It's like, say somebody's driving a car and there's a cliff coming up ahead, and the person driving the car doesn't know that because it's a windy road, but you're in a helicopter and you're up ahead and you're like, oh shit, they're about to go off that cliff. These folks, like, they see the bigger picture. They know what's coming. And I just have a feeling that something's coming. They know it. They're preparing in certain ways and guiding us in certain ways. And we're just sort of down here trying to figure out, like, through all these little mini micro actions, like, okay, what does
Yeah.
this mean? What does this mean?
So the last thing that I wanted to end this absolutely fascinating discussion on, and Jordan, I really appreciate you taking the time talking with me about all of this stuff. Like, these are some of my favorite things to discuss on this channel. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is the practical approach to how do you actually build up your inner engine. So just as a quick example, what I've been doing with the meditation, I told you before, with the breathing techniques being done, the Wim Hof method, various pranayama things, getting the kundalini flowing in the back. One experience that I've had when I do a lot more of this is that when I go to sleep, before I actually drift off into any kind of dreamland, I would have these moments of lying in bed and seeing in a very crystal clear way, not some kind of a, visual of, a cityscape or mountains or something that's, well rendered in that, not well rendered, not something that's super detailed. What I would see most of the time, and it would go on maybe for like 1/8 of a second, like super quick, is the equivalent of when you would put your eyes directly in front of one of those granite countertops. So you would see like a rocky type of texture. It wouldn't look like an image. It would look like you're actually staring at this thing. You would have like some reflection of light. You know what I mean? Like certain little cracks in it. Like it would look real, but it
Yeah.
would still be relatively primitive in comparison to, like what I'm seeing right now in this studio room of mine. What I said right now, is this in any way familiar to you as far as maybe certain steps when it comes to going into these various realms?
You mean the fact that it's sort of like fuzzy and amorphous? It's
Not
not.
fuzzy, not amorphous. It's just very simple in terms of what you're seeing. Rather than seeing a whole scene play out in front of you that's realistic, you would see, and this isn't, by the way, we're not even talking about the lucid dreams. This is like pre-lucid dreams. This is just like when you're lying in bed with your eyes
Yeah.
closed, like maybe in the first 5 minutes, you would see a texture that would be super realistic. Just like imagine, like if you go into your kitchen and if you have like a granite countertop, just like
Mhm.
stare directly at that granite countertop. So it wouldn't be fuzzy, it wouldn't be blurry. You would actually make out the texture in a really realistic way, but it would last
Yeah.
super quick and it wouldn't really showcase anything beyond that particular texture.
I'll tell you just, I don't I think everybody sees different things when they close their eyes. There's actually this like chart that shows all the different, like some people see like very geometric things. Some people see
Mhm.
swirling lights. Some people see nothing. Some people see vivid images. There's actually a chart that shows all the different things they've compiled by talking to people, what they see when they close their eyes. Um, for me, what you said is very similar. So when I close my eyes, I can't visualize. So if you said, okay, visualize a red car, and I close my eyes, I would see this like red blob, and it wouldn't be detailed at all. There would be
Oh,
no
speaking
clarity
of
to it.
not being detailed, yeah, you
I know,
got
right?
blurry there for a second.
That was pretty funny. Um, so that's what I see is it's just kind of like blobby and it's kind of fuzzy and stuff. And it used to really annoy me. And I worked really hard at meditation and everything. And here's what started happening. I'd close my eyes and everything's black, but there's all these swirling colors, but I don't pay attention to those. In front of my vision, there would be like a blacker than black. So everything's black, but there's this part in the
Sure.
middle that's black, even blacker. And then around it would be like a cloudy edge where it's kind of like it's kind of moving and it's like kind of grayish. So there's essentially like this portal and it's black with
Okay.
a super black portal. Now what I do is I start moving towards that hole. And whenever I go through the hole, and like I feel when I go through the hole, like I can literally feel like whoop, I'm through that hole and it gets really big, like this, whoop, like that. Then everything is so fucking clear. Like it's like HDDD. It's like, it's like 8K. It's like crazy how clear things are. But I have to go through that portal. And it's strange, but I've gotten really good at doing that. And then things just come to life. It's like hyper realism. There's this
So,
thing
so
called
what so what kind of things do you see when you go through the hole?
it all depends. It depends on what I'm doing. So the way it started is I'd go through that hole, and this is what I was telling you earlier, where I'd be in someone else's body. So imagine this: everything's black. There's a
Uh-huh.
black hole in front of me. I'm moving through it, and then woof, I'm through it. And I would literally be the first time it happened. I still remember because it freaked me out. I'm sitting on a bench, and there's a girl in front of me, and kind of she had freckles on her face, kind of overweight, like I could see her. I'm just describing what I see in my head. She had like olive skin. I couldn't tell her nationality, but I saw her and she's right here in my face and she's talking to me. And I could see the freckles, I could see the pores in her face, I could see everything. And it was like the most realistic, hyper real thing ever. And we're on this like bench in this, I don't know, kind of park type thing.
Wait,
And
wait,
I'm just staring
olive
at her.
skin? What color is olive?
Kind of like Mediterranean, kind of like, you know what I mean? Like kind of Greek or something. Like not really white and not really tanned, but not just kind of like olive skin. I just remember that
Hmm.
she had like
Yeah,
red,
because I
like
thought you
dark
said olive, I
freckles.
was thinking like green. I was like, no,
No, no,
this
no.
is more more realistic.
No, kind
But
of like
she
Mediterranean.
so she had freckles, so it's almost like she's a combination of maybe some DNA from like Ireland or like Italy, something like that
It was a very
together.
distinct look. Like, I can see it right now. It was so clear. Anyways, and this happened a whole bunch. Like, that was just the first one, and I was like, "That's so strange," because she's talking to me, and I don't hear anything. There's no words, there's no anything.
Yeah.
I can see her lips moving, and I'm staring in her face, and I'm definitely in a body, but it's not me. I don't know who this person is. Never seen her before in my life. And then this happened multiple times. Like, every time I would drop in, and I'm doing Hemi-Sync the whole time, and I would go through that portal, and then poof, I'm in someone's body looking at something. But it's not, I don't know. I never got the impression that I knew the person or that it was had any significance to me. It's almost just like rolling the dice and boom, you're in this dude.
Were you talking with her?
There was obviously a conversation going on because like she would talk and then like I would be staring at her. I could see everything and then, but I couldn't hear myself and I couldn't hear her. Completely mute.
Uh,
Yeah.
oh wow, that's pretty interesting. So you had no idea what the conversation was. What about
Zero.
the view? Where were you sitting? Was it outside, inside?
I mean, this happened probably 10 different times, where it was like me and what
Well,
felt like
no,
someone else's body.
in that dimension, yeah, where you were with that girl, where were you guys in? Were you guys in a room? Were you guys outside on the
Oh,
patio?
the first one, we were on a park bench. It was very obviously, I remember seeing like, because I could see her. I never saw me. I could just see her. Um,
Okay.
so it was like a park bench. I don't know where.
Did you
I didn't scan
smell?
around.
Did you smell? Did you feel?
So no, so I'm trained in remote viewing and I'm pretty good at remote viewing. And with remote viewing, you can bring in like this extrasensory perception, but you can bring in this data and in it you can render it and basically in your mental movie, like I said before, because it's just data. And you can smell things, you can hear things, you get feelings and emotions, that kind of stuff in remote viewing. This is different. I didn't hear anything, I didn't smell anything. It was such a strange experience. And it happened multiple times. That's why it wasn't just like this one fluky thing. And it started getting to the point where it was freaking me out. Because there's this thing called clicking out whenever you're in Hemi-Sync. You're trying to toe the line, that hypnagogic state between awake and asleep. So they call it mind awake, body asleep. You want your body to be asleep, but your mind to be super sharp and awake. And after a certain amount of time, it's really hard to toe that line, and you click out. And when you click out, it's not like losing consciousness. It's not like falling asleep. What happens is you click out of your body. You click out of this reality, and you click into another reality. And when you click back into your body, usually at the end of the tape, like Robert Monroe's voice comes on, he'll be like, now it's time to return to your physical body, and that happens. And you're just like, you're like, what the fuck? And that's what it was. And then you would remember what just happened. But you don't have any conscious control. Like I couldn't, when I'm in the body, I can't be like, let's see what's over here. You know what I mean? Like you're locked in, and it's strange. Now maybe I could get to the point where I could commandeer the body and stuff. Who knows?
Yeah, like being John Malkovich style.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I didn't want to learn how to do that. I didn't even want to do these things. These things would just inadvertently happen. It's when I went to
Oh.
the Monroe Institute and I actually got good and I learned, okay, here's what to actually do and stuff. And then it didn't happen anymore. That was back in my training
Hmm.
days where I just was recklessly doing things in the wrong way. But yeah, those experiences were nuts. But the only reason I even said all that is because like I would have that like black portal on the black background. And even when I do like past life regression and when I do any kind of a thing having to do with me having to, I don't know, really get to an altered state of consciousness, I pass through that portal. And that's on the other side of that portal is a different reality.
So the portal that you're talking about, it definitely reminds me of this visual that I have on the
Hmm.
screen right now, which I
Yeah.
did all the way back in 2016, where I was doing a lot of these breathing techniques at the time, and I started seeing this white light in the center made out of these balls over here rotating these
Yeah.
little white orbs, and in the very center was this cross star-like thing, and it showed itself in different ways. It also showed itself as a I showed this to you earlier, as a five-pointed star as well, which, by the way, like human beings, we're kind of a five-pointed star if you really think about it.
Yeah.
Like the head and the arms and the legs, there is something there. I believe that's going on. It's interesting, but what I haven't done yet is actually being able to go through this thing. And one other thing about this five-pointed star geometric dance that's being done here is that these little orbs, they would dance around, they would play around, and they would create other shapes like triangles or a DNA helix, or, so it seems like there is this primitive attempt at creating certain patterns unconsciously that I'm observing, almost like, I mean, look, I don't want to get too boastful and say, well, this is the building blocks of life that we're seeing over here, but it awfully looks a lot like it. I don't know. Like, if I were to imagine there being like the creation of existence and what that would look like, I don't know. I think it would kind of look like little white orbs and little white little white angles being created, little white lines and little white orbs creating these angles, creating these shapes. And then from these shapes, you would then have more advanced shapes being done, three-dimensional shapes being done. And then lo and behold, you have existence as we know it. So I don't know. That's just my interpretation.
Kind of like the Platonic realm of forms is like this mathematical like realm, and we're sort of the shadows of it. It's like the architecture of this reality, which is going to be like, like right now I'm looking at you and everything, but like on the computer, you're just zeros and ones. Like there's this binary system that translates the information, and then the computer renders it into this nice, pretty picture. I think our reality is very similar to that. Like I said before, everything is information fundamentally, and then our brains as like a VR headset for that information, and we render this beautiful world. So like outside of this world, the back end is going to be more like the Platonic realm of forms, which is going to be like sacred geometry. It's going to be these, decahedrons and these different types of geometric shapes that we can't really explain because they're in a different dimension. They could be like a 5-dimensional mathematical realm of forms. And the way they're put together and the way they're constructed and the patterns is what projects essentially, this reality. So I definitely do believe that this physical world is a 3D, basically holographic projection of a 2D substrate. And that 2D substrate is going to be more like that, like what you just showed, like these sacred geometric, forms, not zeros and ones, but mathematical.
Yeah. Well, last thing, since you were talking about sonic geometry, I wanted to share some sonic geometry of my own.
Hey.
So this was a post that I made also like back in 2016 about Sonic the Hedgehog, having to do with a lot of this ancient mystical lore. Yeah. Really? Which particular Sonic? The original one, or Sonic 2, Sonic 3?
Oh, all of them. Like she's an artist, so she's a comic book artist, so she's
nice.
Really into the Sonic comics. But yeah, all of it.
So over here, there is a connection that I'm making with Sonic the Hedgehog and the Farvahar in Zoroastrianism. You could see like the Farvahar holds up the ring and then points up, just like Sonic points up. And he's inside of the winged disc, which we have also seen, by the way. Jason Giorgiani talks about how this winged disc symbol, we see it all around these ancient cultures. And this is kind of like a sign of these Atlantean knowledge givers. This is their logo. This is their corporate logo. The wing.
Even in like Native America, it's like the Thunderbird, and it's very prominent.
Yeah, exactly. And also, this is just a side thing, but I found that the Zoroastrians, the Iranians, they really were into hedgehogs, and they had these little hedgehog figures here. This one with the wheels over here, and over here we have the Zoroastrian cosmology, the creation and final battle mythology of good versus evil, dualism that we see in Sonic, as well as many other stories, the freeing of trapped souls from their robotic cages. So you see over here, the Sonic lore involves these little helpless animals being trapped inside of these robots by Dr. Eggman, and then Sonic frees them, cracks them open. Is there anything else that you see in terms of various religions or mythologies having to do with like the animals being trapped or the souls being trapped inside of these vessels, which then need to be smashed open?
Well, I mean, so like I did a post a while ago. I did a deep dive on this. I can't recall exactly, but it had to do with how birds and owls and things are used as vehicles for higher consciousnesses. And if you think about it, like how many mystical experiences people have had with falcons and hawks and owls, especially.
Ravens, Carlos Castaneda.
Exactly. And what I think is like, there's something spiritual about flying just in general, but if you think about, like, if you wanted to say you're a higher intelligence and you wanted to get into a physical avatar to come into this physical world, a bird would be a great way to do it. Like, you're on a plane of
Mhm.
your own, you know, you can escape easily, you can oversee
Yeah.
things, you can get from point A to point B really fast. It's kind of like a drone, and it's a perfect vehicle for like a consciousness, like we talked about earlier. I call this a
Yeah.
simulator. It's a simulator for consciousness development. But say you just wanted, say you're a consciousness and you needed to enter into the simulator. You needed to go into the video game. If I wanted to go into that Sonic game, I would have to be one of those characters. I couldn't just go in there like myself. That'd be weird. So if some intelligence or consciousness wants to enter into this reality, they have to come into a character. They have to be in a
Yeah.
biological form. When they try to come in their natural form, they're all glitchy and it just doesn't work. So they enter in temporarily into these avatars, and I think that that's birds, owls, things like that, are definitely a part of that.
I mean, this is my theory with anime girls. They
Yeah.
have this neotenous face, which is very much like a gray alien. So I think that the Japanese, I mean, you know, Sonic is a Japanese creation too. I think that the Japanese are very shamanistic people. Like they
Mhm.
have this unconscious reality of, you know, all these daimonic beings, you know, in terms of Shinto belief that everything has a life force to it, everything has like some level of consciousness. And so I think that they may be able to channel through their creations, like some of the most genius video games like Xenogears. I don't know if you played Xenogears back in the
Mhm.
day. Highly recommend that. I think it's a mind-blowing game. I mean, I think you're already going to know what all of this is about, but either way, for anybody who's watching who has not played Xenogears, take some time, download a PSX emulator or whatever, or find it somewhere. Xenogears, I highly recommend you play that. But anyway, just to finish up over here, as far as the Sonic thing, if I am able to find it, which I am not right now. Damn, I lost the tab. Anyway, I'll find it later. The point is that there's a lot of interesting things. Oh, here, never mind. I found it. And by the way, if you guys are enjoying the show, make sure to smash that subscribe button. Do it this instant. Smash the subscribe button right now. Smash the like button. Click the bell. All of this is very, very important for the growth of the channel. So anyway, I'm gonna finish this up over here. Just want to show a couple of more things. This is the spiritual eye, which actually looks pretty similar to that five-pointed star thing that I showed you before, right? So it talks about when the yogi concentrates long enough with half-opened eyes at the point between the eyebrows, and when the gaze is without any restless motion, he will be able to see a steady light surrounded by other but flickering lights. He should not be diverted by this glimmering halo of the spiritual eye, but should steadfastly look at the center of the eye until he feels his mind completely absorbed within it. In time, he will see the perfect formation of the spiritual eye, a dark opal blue globe within a quivering ring of flame. Gradually, by deep concentration, an extremely brilliant white star occasionally glimmers in the center of the blue. The star is the gateway through which the consciousness must pass to attain oneness with spirit. So there we go. And this is from Sonic's bonus stage over here in Sonic 1, if you guys remember that. See, it looks exactly like this Tibetan
Yeah.
mandala over here. So again, you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. The Freemasons as well. You have the Masonic chessboard, and you have the chessboard imagery and Green Hill Zone, as well as those little posts are like the posts that you get when you get to a certain part of the level, and it kind of like saves your progress there. That kind of looks like that. I don't know why I don't have an image of the post there. Platonic solids. Anyway, you get the idea. You know what I'm talking about here. Jordan,
Life imitates art, man, or art
life
imitates life. Who knows which way?
exactamundo. So, Jordan, where could people find you? Any final messages, and what are you working on right now?
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. So I'm on X probably way more than I should be. So that's where that's where you can get my most raw thoughts. I don't really screen or filter anything. You just get it all. I'm on YouTube, all the places. You can go to my website, digijordan, Jordan.com, and it'll have links to all my stuff. I do human design coaching, and I have a couple products and stuff that I've made that just help in different ways. Law of probability is my big thing that I spend a lot of time on, because it's it's kind of like the quantum mechanics of manifestation. I used these different manifestation techniques to heal my body, and they worked, and it like freaked me out because they work so good. And I was like, okay, how the hell does this work? So I spent a long time delving into like literally the science and the mechanics and the quantum mechanics of how your thoughts affect reality, and created my own framework that I used for myself for years. And then I put it out because people were asking for it. So it's called the law of probability. And it's just a way to basically, become the creator of your life and stop going with the flow, take control of the bus, man. And so that's a big thing that I do now. I'll be at South by Southwest in a couple weeks.
Nice.
Yeah, I'll be speaking from there. I have a podcast, Conscious Observers. I do 2 episodes a week, so come check it out, guys. We talk about crazy things, but everything has to do with consciousness. And that's just the main thing I focus on is consciousness, what it is, what our purpose is here. A lot of what I do has to do with purpose, not just spinning your wheels, but what are we actually doing here? And so that's kind of what I do, and talk to cool people like you.
And would you ever consider making a video together with another Jordan Crowder, who I found over here on YouTube? I think you may have run into this guy over here, Connoisseur of Fine Washrooms, the Gentleman Scufflow podcast. So
fuck that Jordan Crowder. No.
What about Steven Crowder? Are any relation to Steven Crowder?
No relation. That Jordan Crowder is actually his younger brother. So
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's not me. Yeah, we're kind of the same age, and he has a beard and shit, so it really fucks up the Google results.
No, there can only be one. So you guys are gonna have to call like for a duel at a certain point. Take certain steps back, and then whoever comes out alive is going to keep going.
Yeah, that guy right. Can go to hell.
Oh god. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. Jordan, thank you so much for doing this. I look forward to talking a lot more about all this really, really cool stuff. And guys, keep being curious about all the stuff that's out there. Always ask questions. Always try to channel your inner Socrates, who, by the way, also had a daimon. So there you go. Like, what does that tell you? If Socrates had a daimon, then should be no problem there. But just be careful. Don't make any like deals with demons, or else you may find yourself with a lot of problems in your life. Anyway, I'm just saying, not pointing any particular people out here, but
stay
just
a free agent. Don't join any sides. Try to stay as agnostic as possible. Try to keep an open mind, and try just to be a complete sovereign individual. It will do you well on earth, and it'll do you well on the other side as well.
That's beautifully stated. Jordan, thank you so much, brother. And I will catch you guys next time on Break the Rules. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe. And Jordan, please don't close this tab after we're done, because StreamYard needs to process the video, or you could leave your computer on. It doesn't matter. I never say this to people, and it always ends up being a thing. Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye, everybody.